Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from Al-Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Syria's new de facto leader says he will name the senior members of Assad's government responsible for war crimes as he offers rewards for information. Meanwhile, Israel destroys the Syrian naval fleet and targets suspected chemical weapons sites. In Tel Aviv, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu testifies in his corruption case for the first time as he's charged with bribery, fraud and breach of trust. An Ivy League graduate, Luigi Mangione, is charged with the fatal shooting of the United Healthcare CEO in New York City after being arrested by police in Pennsylvania. To our top story, and the HTS leader says incoming authorities will announce a list of former senior Assad officials they believe were involved in war crimes. In a statement on Telegram, Ahmed al-Sharaa offered rewards to anyone who provides information. Mohammed al-Bashir has been named Syria's caretaker prime minister until March 2025 by the HTS. He's been speaking to Al-Arabiya.
Today, a session of the Council of Ministers was held, bringing together the working team of the Syrian Salvation Government, which was operating in the Idlib region, along with representatives from the government of the deposed Syrian regime. The session focused on transferring institutions and files from the deposed regime's government to the Syrian interim government, which will oversee these files and manage operations. Essentially, this will serve as a transitional government tasked with running day-to-day affairs, with the transitional period expected to conclude, God willing, by the 1st of March 2025. This mandate was assigned by the general leadership, entrusting us with the responsibility of managing the Syrian government's operations.
Our correspondent Trent Murray is currently on the Syrian border and has sent us this report.
Well, as the dust settles on these historic days in Syria, we are now starting to get a clue over how this new HTS-led authority will look to govern Syria. News today, Mohammed al-Bashir has been appointed as the caretaker prime minister. He ran what was a quasi-government effectively in Syrian opposition territory before this lightning offensive, and HTS has now put him in charge of Syria more broadly until March 1, 2025. We're also seeing how they may react to former officials of the Assad regime. They have said that those involved in torture in Syria will be held accountable, and they are compiling a list of names, saying that while at the same time saying that they will continue to try and reach out to broader groups inside of the country, including minorities like Christians and Kurds. We are seeing, though, yet more signs of the desperate situation in Damascus under the Assad regime. Rescuers finding a morgue with some 40 bodies inside that they said showed signs of torture. And of course, the broader geopolitical implications of all of this continue to play out. We are here at the Syria-Israel border, where we are seeing continued military maneuvers from the Israeli Defense Force. We know tanks and troops are continuing to move just beyond that buffer zone there, separating the two sides, but also operating in the sky. Over 300 airstrikes reported targeting former Assad military bases, Air Force bases, Navy ports and weapon storage areas. The Israelis are saying the justification for that is they want to make sure that those weapons don't fall into the hands of extremists. But of course, many in this region are expressing concern, including the likes of Egypt, Saudi Arabia and Turkey, who have said Israel is effectively using the power vacuum inside of Syria to seize more territory for itself.
Trent Murray on the Syrian border. Thank you very much for that report. Sticking with Syria now, as local media have reported, Israeli warplanes have carried out dozens of attacks across the country, including in the capital city of Damascus. There's suspected links to chemical weapons amongst the sites hit, with Israel claiming it's acting to stop weapons falling into the hands of extremists after the fall of Assad. The Israeli Navy has also destroyed the Syrian naval fleet. I'm now able to speak to former British Army Colonel and chemical weapons expert Hamish D. Breton-Gordon. Hamish, thank you so much for joining us. Israel's Defense Minister, Israel Katz, has confirmed troops destroyed the Syrian military fleet overnight. Really, what is the justification for this?
Well, I think, as your report said, the Israelis are trying to prevent any key bits of equipment falling into extremist hands. And we know that there's still a large group of ISIS jihadists in the east of Syria. So the most important thing is, at the moment, is securing the Assad chemical weapons stockpile. Unfortunately, when it was declared in 2013, Assad and his ministers lied about the extent of it. And we know that there's still a lot of chemical weapons in Syria. And this seems to be the main aim of the Israeli attacks, to try and destroy those dumps of chemical weapons by blowing them up. And we also, my own personal experience with the Iraqi Kurd Peshmerga military in the fight with ISIS back in 2015, 2017, we knew that ISIS had chemical weapons and fired them at us. So it's crucial that whether the Israelis or anybody else destroy these chemical weapons as soon as possible before they can get into extremists' hands.
Hamish, I just want to pick up on something you mentioned there. Is there this potential threat that ISIS could make a reappearance on the global stage following the fall of Assad? Is this why this is happening and unfolding right now?
Well, certainly, along with the Israelis, the US are also conducting extensive airstrikes on ISIS, Islamic State groups, and some of their encampments in the east of the country. Now that ISIS have been subdued by the Iraqi military and also the Iraqi Kurd military, along with the coalition, it's key that these extremists are not allowed to develop and not giving the chance. So, yeah, I, for one, welcome the US strikes to make sure that they cannot get involved, so that the people in Syria have a chance to be able to rebuild their country so badly devastated by Assad. And as your report says, the early signs with the setting up of an interim government to try and keep the government agencies running seems to me a positive step. And I spent many years in Idlib province helping medical setups and others. And I know that the people there and all my Syrian friends are incredibly excited. And anything the international community can do to help with this smooth transition is to be welcomed.
Hamish, of course, you say there's excitement, but there's also trepidation on what is to come in the future when it comes to Syria. And we look forward to who will, take place and what will happen in the country. But I just want to go back to the chemical weapons, because obviously you mentioned there the OPCW destroyed those weapons in 2013. So right now, why are we worried? Do we know how many weapons are left in Syria? Do we know anything about this at all?
Well, certainly, I was in Syria at the time trying to find evidence of the chemical attacks by Assad. And when the Assad government declared its stockpile of chemical weapons, about 1,500 tons of precursors, certainly myself and the other experts who knew about these things thought that that was woefully short. In fact, they probably declared less than 50% of the chemical weapons they had, subsequently used them many, many times. And it's clear that those places where they stored them and developed them were still intact. I think it's fairly clear as well that coalition US and other Middle Eastern countries who've been involved in the coalition, their intelligence knows where these sites are, and it would appear the Israelis do as well. So, yeah, they still exist. They are a real threat, and the sooner they're removed. In a perfect world, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the UN watchdog, would go in and remove them or destroy them in place. Now, that hopefully will happen, and certainly the OPCW will go and verify that they've all been destroyed. But at the moment, things are very tricky in the country, and the force protection required for a UN agency to go in will take a time to put together. But I hope the UN and the OPCW are ready to go and help in Syria and also to verify the destruction of those chemical weapons.
Hamish, just moving on, we know that Russia has been a staunch supporter of the former Assad government and is currently giving the former president asylum. But can Syria really rest easy now? We've been talking there about how much the people have suffered, from attacks from Russia and Iran, or is there still a threat of these Assad allies in Syria?
Well, I think you make a very good point there. The Russians and the Iranians have made the Syrian people suffer far too much over the last 10 or so years. It is clear that the Russians have run away in numbers very quickly. So I think the chance that the Russians can still have an effect, all their forces and all their aircraft have gone. There may well be some Iranian militias still around, but the Iranian militias and Hezbollah and some of the other supporters have been much denuded over the last few months and particularly over the last few weeks. And I think Tehran itself has been very severely damaged by what's happening. So hopefully, and I know there are a lot of ifs and buts around, the Russians and the Iranians should not be able to affect what's happening in Syria. And the best thing the international community can do is to help the Syrian people, most of who are moderate and secular minded, to rebuild their country. That's where Western and Middle Eastern resources and money hopefully will come in and give them a chance to set up a new moderate country, as certainly every Syrian I know, that's what they desire. And let's hope the international community can do it. And we can learn an awful lot from the disasters of what happened after Saddam Hussein was deposed in 2003, and also some of the way we dealt with what in Afghanistan. But we've learned those lessons, and hopefully they can help the new Syrian government develop a country that the Syrian people want and deserve.
Hamish D. Breton-Gordon, the former British Army colonel and chemical weapons expert, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
To Tel Aviv now, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has appeared in court today charged with bribery, fraud and breach of trust. Netanyahu has been told by judges that he's expected to testify 3 times a week despite the ongoing war in Gaza and the current situation in neighbouring Syria. It is the first time a sitting Israeli Prime Minister has been charged with the crime, and he denies any wrongdoing and is pleading not guilty. I'm now joined by Daily Telegraph correspondent Yotam Confino from Herzliya, north of Tel Aviv. Yotam, good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us. So this kind of trial has never been seen before in Israel, and Netanyahu has fiercely denied any of these wrongdoings. Basically, he's saying it's a witch hunt. Is he right?
That's the question we're hopefully going to find out. Netanyahu has for years now accused this of being a conspiracy made up by the deep state, as he calls it. It's basically the left-wing elite in Israel who are working together with the judicial system, the attorney general, the police even, and they're all trying to topple the democratically elected leader that is Netanyahu. Now, this is, of course, a wild accusation, and it's something that Netanyahu is trying to convince all of the people who support him that is the case. But I think most Israelis see this as a fair trial, because Netanyahu has admitted to meeting a lot of the people that he allegedly made some quid pro quo deals with to get favorable media coverage, and also getting cigars and champagne worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. So either way, Netanyahu cannot simply deny that he knows all of these people. Some of them have turned state witnesses, and he might not be guilty of all of these things. But if he's found guilty of just one of them, it could send him to jail, and of course, it could end his political career forever.
So this has been a long-running corruption case, but I'm wondering, and lots of questions have been asked, is why has there been such a delay in this case?
It's a good question. First of all, Israel's judicial system is under immense pressure. There's a lack of, first of all, lack of judges, but also it's extremely tedious. The former Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, who was also indicted and actually ended up going to jail, his case also took years. And Netanyahu's 3 cases are much more complicated. So it's not a big surprise that it's taken a lot of time. And you have to also add that we experienced a pandemic during his trial, which also delayed all of this. And of course, the war in Gaza. And now the situation in Syria, which has also delayed the trial significantly. So many different things played a role here in the delay of it. But still, we're 4 years into this, and only now is Netanyahu taking the witness stand. And we don't know exactly when there'll be a verdict, but it'll likely take plenty more time before we see that.
And this isn't the only battle Netanyahu is facing. The ICC are also pursuing him for war crimes for his role in the Gaza war. What more do we know?
So Netanyahu is probably the most haunted man on the planet right now when it comes to trials and wars. It's quite extraordinary that he has to deal with all these things at the same time. When it comes to the ICC, Netanyahu has managed to convince some of his allies, in particular France, to make a U-turn when it comes to this arrest warrant. They will no longer arrest him if he sets foot in France, but the US and Germany and other countries also won't. So he is still safe in several countries. But I think he's more concerned about his own trial here, because the worst thing that can happen to him is that he's found guilty in all of these 3 cases, which could send him to jail for 10 years. And he would go down in history as the most corrupt prime minister in Israel's history. That is not the legacy he wants to leave. Netanyahu is trying to portray himself as a modern-day Thomas Jefferson, as he said in trial today, as somebody who's a Churchill-like statesman who fights for Israel's interest. And of course, this trial is a huge stain on his career.
Yotam Confino, correspondent from the Daily Telegraph, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at some other stories making the headlines today. Residents in Malibu, California have been evacuated after a wildfire broke out on Monday night. Firefighters have been tackling the blaze, which has been dubbed the Franklin Fire. It started in Malibu Canyon and is thought to be a bush blaze, which has affected hundreds of acres of vegetation. Donald Trump's son, Eric, says he doesn't want a role in the US government, but believes there will be a very large wall between Trump's organization and the government. Speaking in Abu Dhabi, he also revealed US partners in the Gulf can expect peace, stability and safety from his father's second term as president. Germany will make migrant smuggling to the UK a criminal offence in a bid to tackle small boat crossings. Last night, the British Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, signed the deal with her German counterpart. Under the agreement, the 2 countries will also work together to remove smuggling content from social media. Jay-Z has asked for the identity of the woman accusing him of rape to be revealed or the case be dismissed. The music mogul, real name Sean Carter, denies the assault on the 13-year-old, which allegedly took place after the MTV Video Music Awards in 2000. Brazil's president is said to be recovering from surgery after a brain bleed. Lula da Silva was taken to hospital on Monday after complaining of a headache. Doctors who performed a craniotomy say the president is in a stable condition and was conscious following the operation. New Zealand plans to ban greyhound racing, citing an unacceptably high rate of injuries. The government plans to wind down the industry over the next 20 months to allow time for the rehoming of racing dogs. Commercial greyhound racing is currently allowed in Australia, Ireland, the UK and also the US. And Time magazine's Person of the Year shortlist has been revealed today. The top 10 finalists include the podcaster Joe Rogan, Catherine the Princess of Wales, President-elect Donald Trump, Republican election candidate Kamala Harris, and the tech tycoon Elon Musk. To the US now, and a 26-year-old has been charged with murder over a fatal shooting in New York last week that sparked a major manhunt across multiple US states. Luigi Mangione, who for days was America's most wanted man, was detained in Pennsylvania after being recognized at a McDonald's. He's suspected of killing Brian Thompson, the CEO of the country's largest healthcare insurance company. Benji Heyer reports.
Luigi Mangione taken into custody overnight, an employee at this fast food restaurant in the town of Altoona, tipping off officers and bringing to an end a widespread search for the gunman.
For just over 5 days, our NYPD investigators combed through thousands of hours of video, followed up on hundreds of tips, and processed every bit of forensic evidence, DNA, fingerprints, IP addresses, and so much more to tighten the net. We deployed drones, canine units, and scuba divers. We leveraged the domain awareness system, Argus cameras, and conducted aviation canvasses. And our detectives also went door to door, interviewing potential witnesses and doing the good old-fashioned police work that our investigators are famous for.
Mangione was arrested almost 400 kilometres from the scene of the crime. This is him readying his firearm before discharging it at point-blank range in Midtown Manhattan. A premeditated, targeted attack, officials say, against Brian Thompson, boss of United Healthcare.
Violence can never be used to address political differences, or to address a substantive difference, or to try and prove some ideological point. That is not what we do in a civilized society. That was true in Butler, it was true in New York City, and it's true anywhere. That is not how you make progress in this country. The person, the suspect here, who shot at that CEO and killed that CEO is a coward, not a hero. And we need to make sure that in this country we get back to having a civil discourse about our differences. And that is an important lesson coming out of Pennsylvania, and it is one that I think the rest of the nation needs to hear as well.
Police are now looking into a motive. Mangione was found in possession of an unregistered ghost gun, possibly made from a 3D printer, as well as a manifesto critical of corporate America and the health insurance sector, referring to industry heads as parasites. He'd recently suffered a painful back injury, according to his estranged friends. His family say they're shocked and devastated by the news. The Maryland-born computer science university graduate is currently being held without bail in Pennsylvania before being presented with the option of waiving or contesting his extradition to the state of New York. Benji Heyer, Al-Arabiya News.
To Asia now, and Taiwan says it has detected dozens of ships in the biggest maritime mobilization around Taiwan in years, as it monitors what it says is a surge of Chinese military activities in the Taiwan Strait and the Western Pacific. Beijing voiced fury at President Lai Chang-te's recent visit to the United States, but has not confirmed it is carrying out any exercises. Laura Westbrook has more.
Taiwan has been on alert since its president William Lai Ching-te made his first overseas trip as president, and that included stops in Hawaii and the U.S. territory of Guam last week, as has been practice for years. But during his stop in Guam, Lai called on like-minded countries to never bow down to totalitarianism, and that trip has drawn the ire of Beijing, who calls Lai a separatist and threatened to counter with resolute measures. China claims Taiwan as its own to be reunited by force if necessary. And according to reports, around 90 Chinese naval and coast guard ships were in regional waters and around the Taiwan Strait. That appears to be broader than previous exercises. Earlier, Taiwan's defense ministry said it had also detected 47 Chinese aircraft around the island. Beijing, though, has not announced military drills or acknowledged the large-scale deployment mentioned by Taipei. However, a Beijing foreign ministry spokeswoman said on Tuesday that China will resolutely defend its sovereignty. China has been ramping up military activities around Taiwan for years. These are what's known as grey zone tactics. That's military speak for moves that fall between war and peace. Analysts have told me that this represents a new way for China to increase pressure on Taiwan. The U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said on Monday that China was the only country in the world that has the intent and increasingly the capability to change the rules-based international order. Like most countries, the United States does not recognize Taiwan as independent, but it opposes any attempt to take the island by force and is committed to supplying it with weapons to defend itself.
Laura Westbrook in Hong Kong, thank you so much for joining us. Let's take a look at some of the top business news. And job vacancies in the United Kingdom have fallen faster than similar countries over the past year, according to recruitment platform Indeed. The company's data showed there were 23% fewer jobs advertised on its site compared to a year earlier. It's thought to be connected to the loss of momentum in the British economy. The cost of coffee is set to increase after the price for Arabica beans topped $3.44 a pound, having already jumped more than 80% this year. Coffee producers in Brazil and Vietnam are blaming bad weather for the lack of crops. A Nevada court has denied Rupert Murdoch's bid to change a trust and give full control of News Corp to his eldest son Lorcan when he dies. According to the New York Times, the court believed Murdoch and his son had acted in bad faith by intentionally cutting out the media mogul's other two children for fear of interference, calling their efforts a carefully crafted charade. Turning to sports now, and a former world cycling champion could be jailed for 7 years after admitting to causing death by dangerous driving. Rowan Dennis was arrested and charged in relation to a car crash that killed his wife, fellow Olympic cyclist Melissa Hodgkins, in Adelaide in Australia in December last year. And world number one tennis star Aryna Sabalenka has won the WTA Player of the Year. It comes after the Belarusian banked 4 titles in 2024, winning both the Australian and the US Opens. My personal favourite player too. A reminder of our top stories today. Syria's new de facto leader says he will name the senior members of Assad's government responsible for war crimes as he offers rewards for information. Meanwhile, Israel destroys a Syrian naval fleet and targets suspected chemical weapons sites. In Tel Aviv, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu testifies in his corruption case for the first time as he's charged with bribery, fraud and breach of trust. An Ivy League graduate, Luigi Mangione, is charged with the fatal shooting of the United Healthcare CEO in New York City after being arrested by police in Pennsylvania. And that's all from us on W News. Thanks for joining us. Special interview is coming up next. And don't miss Tom Burges Watson with GNT. Good night.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on al-Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
In 2018, Maria Butina was convicted of working as an unregistered Russian foreign agent in the US. She was jailed and then deported to Russia. Butina has always denied being a Russian spy, and at the time, President Vladimir Putin said he had never heard of her. Well, she now serves as a parliamentarian in the Russian State Duma and is a supporter of the Russian military offensive in Ukraine. Maria Butina, good to have you on the show. Now, let's start with the latest developments in Ukraine. Following the recent round of escalation and the warnings issued by President Putin, do you fear the world is now closer to nuclear war than at any other point in your lifetime?
Well, I don't know, because I haven't been in other points of our world's life, like the Cuban Missile Crisis or Caribbean Missile Crisis, depends, where you live and how you call it. But I think we're now in a quite low point of the relationships between Russia and the West, and that's put the whole world in the danger.
The numbers of casualties are difficult to calculate, and they're disputed by both sides. But after the 1,000-day milestone was passed, how are the Russian people managing to accept the losses of their sons, and do they clearly know what the sacrifice is for?
They absolutely do. And I was elected from a small region, Kirovsky Oblast, which is located in about 1.5 hour flight from Moscow. And I should tell you that we're all united and we help to the front lines, and we cry for those who are, lost their lives, sacrificing them for our motherland. But we all understand that this is a necessary thing to do, because we are trying to help to the Russians in their new territories, Russian new territories, that's first. And the second, which I view very, very important, we actually are fighting for survival of Russia and the whole world, because we see that Nazism in a full scale is back, and we have to stop it. We absolutely have to stop it.
There are arguments put forward, though, that the Russian people don't necessarily know the full story because of the control of the media there. How can Russian people make a clear decision if they don't have a full idea of what's going on?
Oh, come on, they have quite a full idea what's going on, because, you can go on Telegram channels and you read a lot of stuff from both sides, and people understand what's going on. And even if little villages, people don't rely on TV anymore that much. Only 50% of Russian population is TV watchers. Most of them actually go on social networking and they talk to each other. And you cannot hide the truth. And the truth is that SMO should have been started, because NATO was coming so close to our borders that it would put the whole world in the actual stance of the Third World War. So we were protecting Russian-speaking population, and we absolutely understand how important it is to make a step forward today. So people do know the truth, and they see the truth. And people who come back from the front lines and they're on their vacation, they tell the truth, that how horrible actions are committed by what horrible crimes are committed by the Ukrainian forces that are joined by the NATO forces. Well, we didn't place NATO next to our borders. NATO placed themselves, and they broke their promises. Well, all Russians know it. So we're kind of, smart and intellectual to be able to find out what is true and what is not. And people do it and manage it very well.
And of course, there are accusations from both sides about abuses on the battlefield. But as the new administration comes into the U.S., eyes are turning towards a peace deal. I want to get your perspective on what you regard as a fair peace deal to end the war.
I don't know. Look, first of all, I don't know if the U.S. administration, the new one, is actually credible in terms of what they say and what they do. Because the last time when Trump came to power, I was living in the United States those days, and then they made me to serve prison time for actually peace building in the US, and Trump was in charge. So he was promising to make good relationships with Russia, but in fact, we had more sanctions and more diplomats expelled, and people were more and more distant, removed from each other. I mean, the US people and the Russians that had ever been. So they say they want to stop the conflict. Do they really want to do so? I don't know. And for right now, I do believe that the US is way more focused on the Israel-Palestinian situation than on Ukraine and Russia, because they clearly understand by now that Russia is going to win. There is no options. And the people, they know the truth, and they're going to, fight until the last breath. I mean, the Russians. And Ukraine will lose. There is no other way. And additionally to that, now there are so many people fleeing the West, moving to Russia, that you have to be blind not to see that not just the war on a war field is lost by the West, but they also lost the war for the minds and souls of people if they're moving to Russia. Well, I know I handle this program in the Russian parliament, and I can see every single day more and more people come in with families. They just hate LGBT stuff, and they want to live and raise their families and kids in a peaceful community which they view Russia. So we struggle now how to get so many people in, because they come and there are a lot of them, and they're investors and they have money and do all this stuff. So it's quite surprising for me. But it means the West lost the battle for the souls and for the hearts of the people as well.
Well, the report of there haven't been many reports in terms of people moving to Russia on the western side. Perhaps that wouldn't be surprising. But either way, both Presidents Putin and Trump are regarded as tough negotiators. Who do you regard as the stronger of the two? And do you expect any compromise from President Putin on his objectives?
I expect not a compromise, but I expect a consensus. I mean, I expect both sides to focus on what is profitable for each side, but not on the losses and compromises of which one. And I do believe that this is the only way how to negotiate. Well, first, number one thing that the US should do, they just take their selves out of Europe, because that's not their land. That's not their decision. That's not their solution. There is not their land. They had to get out and let people, Europeans, to decide themselves how they want to live, because they now press every single country in Europe, all the countries, to just follow their will, but they shall not have any power here. There is no reason, and they're just flooding Europe with their money and trying to buy politicians. That's what in fact they do. And that's not the peaceful negotiations. Whom to negotiate with? European countries, including Ukraine now, they lost their sovereignty. They cannot just freely talk anymore, which means that if you want a peaceful, a good deal, the US should step back and realize that this is not their land.
Let me get your perspective, Ms. Butina, on how life has changed for ordinary people in Russia since the war began. How have the economic sanctions been felt? What impact are they having?
Well, we have full grocery stores. We don't have any problems central heating. We don't have any skyrocket prices. We're actually fine. The main thing that changed, and this is absolutely true, that we're all now stand together side by side. Because any time when in Russia some external force is trying to push us, we become more and more united. That's what happened. So now I see a lot of patriotism in Russia, because we know that we have to be close to each other to stand against NATO. Like, that's not a secret anymore. There is no just Ukraine. This is now NATO fighting by Ukrainian lives. That's how it's called, which means that Russians do know, do understand, and they stand by side. And now we are welcoming new foreigners who come, join us and help us. This is what's going on. This is the average mood in Russia. Yes, the hardships, but we used to live in the hardships. Look, they had it during their Second World War, the Great Patriotic War. And yeah, we know how to sorrow. But on the other hand, this is how we used to live. So by external pressure, you cannot conquer Russia. Our empire has been lost for the last ages and ages, and will stand ages to come. It's one of the longest standing empires in the world, multinational. So we're going to be okay. Hard times, but it will make us stronger.
Well, so presumably the reports of increased inflation must be having an impact on the day-to-day lives and will start to test the will of the Russian people.
I don't think so. We have challenges on our will every single day, and because of the living and the weather conditions. So we're kind of used to go through hardships. But talking of inflation, yeah, there are hard times. People understand that, and they just work hard. And actually sanctions open new opportunities for us, because the companies that used to be very small now became big, because now we don't have Western products and they have to take the market, and they love to take the market share. And we have a lot of partners in the BRICS countries that help us, and they want to trade, and we explore new brands. So we don't suffer at all. Meaning that it's not just the US who produces all the things. It's not just Europe. Europe needs Russia because of the gas and and oil and all this stuff. Russia has all the resources in the world. Why would we suffer?
Ms. Butina, I'm just looking at your past, and you lived in America for a while. Of course, it was a difficult time for you. You're accused of being a Russian operative and so on. But are you personally surprised or even saddened by the state of relations between Russia and America? And how do you think the ordinary people in both countries reflect the views of the leadership?
I am sad, because when I came to the States, I expected the American dream to be like we saw in the Hollywood movies in the 70s and the 80s. I expected conservative America, and I expected people who just, have one wonderful yard and they have wonderful families, and America has none of that. Like, not anymore. It's just they lost the country. And now all of that I see here in Russia. And it's just, the world is upside down, indeed. Do I think that people actually share the views of the US government? Well, I don't know, because I see so many people moving from the States, and they hate the government. Well, and they don't like Russia maybe necessarily, but they don't hate us, because people are people. And I actually serve time for having friendship dinners that were paid, by the way, by Americans. And I don't know why I became a Russian agent then, but anyway. So, and the friendship dinners just showed that people want to talk. That's why I support now the civil diplomacy. Well, I did serve time for civil diplomacy, but I was and I am a peace builder, and I will do it in the future, because I believe, and you're absolutely right, if people talk to each other, they don't hate each other. And this is the only way how we can never, ever have the Third World War, because that's my great hope. I don't want any serious conflict between Russia and NATO, because, the whole world will suffer.
Well, you obviously must have made friends during that time in America. As you said, you had dinners with them and so on. In spite of your conviction as an unregistered operative in the country, do you have any particular regrets, and are you still in touch with any of those people?
Yeah, actually, yes. Some of them incognito, but they come here to Russia. It's very sad that we cannot communicate so much, because they're afraid of the US government, that they're going to reach them and, cut them and throw them in prison, because I'm under sanctions. And so I don't want to put them in danger as well. But they do travel here, because this is friendship. Friendship is eternal. Love is eternal. These are the values that the US lost, but there are still people who are like this. And no, I do not hate the United States. I do not hate Americans, because if I do, it means that the bad guys win. So I don't want them to win. That's why I stay faithful. I believe in God. I am conservative, and I will fight for peace until my last breath.
Let me ask you, you, as in the conversation, you always denied being a Russian spy. So what do you think was the reason the justice system there pursued the case and put you in jail? Was it bureaucracy, do you think, or do you think there was a political reason behind it?
I was never accused of being a spy, okay? That's on the first place. Never. It was in the media. It had never been in my conviction, had never been even filed as a paper. And they needed a scapegoat. They needed someone physically to actually arrest at the day when Trump and Putin met. Look at the day of my arrest. Do you think it's a coincidence? They arrested me exactly when President Putin and President Trump were first time to meet, sit in front of each other, and they have this very, very loud case. Because somebody in the US, they don't want peace. They want war because they earn on wars. The private military companies are earning a lot of having wars all over the globe. Question is to us, to Russia, to Europeans, Arabs, Chinese, and all other countries. How long are we gonna let them do that? Are earning money on our life losses? I don't think that's smart. So they needed a scapegoat, they got a scapegoat. And look, if they would have even one piece of evidence that I am a spy, would they let me go in 18 months? No way. I would serve 35 years now, but there was nothing on me. Absolutely nothing. That's why they just wanted the public case and just throw me out of the country, claim I'm the national security threat. Yeah, you can see I'm very much a threat. And then just, make it, and they still having fun on my case, saying like, oh, look, if she met someone, that means she, had relationships. They never ever shown one picture. And as a woman, I'm deeply insulted by that because they were claiming all this relationship with someone. There is no one picture being made. Isn't it suspicious? Well, because it had never happened. This is a fictitious, fake case. This is how Trump says this is fake news.
Well, either way, they put you in prison. Didn't that change your view of the United States at all?
No, because people are people, and corrupted guys in the government are corrupted guys in the government. And, one thing has changed in me after prison and during my prison time. I spent 4 months on solitary confinement, which is against all the conventions against tortures, but don't forget about it. I found God, or God found me, I don't know. But I know one thing, that I shall not hate, and I do not hate. I forgive them. It doesn't mean I should forget, but I forgive them. So, and the bad guys, they will pay their price because you know what? God is just. This is what I believe. I don't need to do any revenge on them. No, that's not my job. God will do everything. And all the people who acted badly, they will get their punishment no matter what. Even if we do nothing and just sitting and watching that, the justice is going to get.
So if you have moved on, but, don't you really want to clear your name officially in the US?
I actually tried. I filed an appeal case, but the problem is that when you're sentenced in the US, you lose your right to appeal because you sign a special paper, or they don't sentence you ever. That's the law. That you cannot appeal and you don't want to appeal, which is maybe sad. And I was very excited when Duran's report got out because there is nothing on me there, because that was the case that they actually based my conviction of, meaning the money that supposedly went from Kremlin to Trump. And then look at the Duran report, there was no money. The question is, why did I serve my time? So would I try to prove that I'm not guilty in the US court now? No, because it's corrupted. It does not make sense. I'll just lose money. In the future, maybe. Well, yes, it's insulting that my name was placed in dirt, because I'm from a family, a very distinguished family of teachers, and I'm a teacher by myself. I've always been a peace builder, and I teach kids. And now kids look at me, saying like, oh, this is a, whatever they call her, a Russian honeypot. I've never been. And this is an insult. But there will be a day. I know there will be a day. And the history will place everything on its deserving spots.
Well, of course, when you were deported from America to Russia, in the American eyes, you were seen as a spy. I'm curious, how were you regarded in Russia? I know Vladimir Putin said he'd never heard of you at the time.
No, well, he mentioned my name a couple of times, but why should he? Meaning I was just a student. That's the thing. I was just a student. Yes, my country fought for me because I'm a Russian citizen, and now I am having this parliament position of fighting for those who are oppressed and are in the prisons because they are Russians. There are a lot of them. And every single person here will stand for a Russian because, we know that tomorrow you will be at this spot. And, well, I do my job here. I'm a lawmaker. I help to people who move into Russia from the West. That's my responsibility today, and I'm very excited to do so. I do have a lot of work, no weekend, no vacation, not because I'm suffering, but because I love my job. That's why, because I love helping people. I used to be a peacemaker. I love helping people. That's what I do today. I help people in prison. And they put me on solitary again for that. I don't care. I know what I do, and I do it for God. And people will do no harm for me because God is with me. Who are people if God is with me?
Yeah, I was wondering about your visit to the Russian opposition activist Alexei Navalny in jail when he was on hunger strike. Why did you do that, and what did he say to you?
He was complaining that he has so bad conditions, so I wanted to check. And I went there and I saw that he's lying. And I said straight to his eyes. And unfortunately, he didn't grant the permission to show the footage of what he was talking to me. He called me, well, I won't pronounce it because I'm a woman and I don't want this to be, public again. But he called me very bad words that is I think inappropriate from a man to say to a woman, and it's unproven. He just repeated the U.S. claims. It was insulting, but anyway, that was not my goal. I told the cameras and the camera crew from the very beginning, because look, I almost died. I went through tortures. I know what tortures are. And if I see just a sign that he's like that, I would stop it, because I would never let my country do what they did with me in the U.S. I lost my health. I lost my reputation, everything for doing nothing. So when I went there, I just wanted to ask how he's doing. And if he needs any help, I do help people to prisons all the time. But he was just fine. He was just cursing me out and just wanted to have, PRI on everything. And I don't know why he did it. I don't know, because I am happy to help. And it doesn't matter if you're an accuser of me, if you're, my former FBI agent, I will always help. That's my nature. And it was so horrible and painful that he was just, I don't know why he did so. I mean, I can see some of his mind.
Based on what you just said, Ms. Butina, considering his reaction to you and you were surprised by his very negative behavior with you, first of all, were you surprised when he died in prison? And secondly, having found religion, did you pray for him? Because religion involves forgiveness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Every single moment. And actually, when he got sick first time after that plane flight, that was, and God will judge me if I'm lying here. Because the first thing there was a COVID time, and I remember it was in my apartment, and I was praying hard, so he gets through it. And God gave him another chance, and he went through it. And the second time, the same. I will pray especially for people who hate me, especially for people who curse me out, because I am a Jesus Christ believer. That's it. You can't change it. Well, you can't explain it for a person who is non-believer, but absolutely yes. And again, if his wife tomorrow shows up and she needs my help, I will help. If tomorrow people who curse me out and, place me in prison, throw me on solitary are going to pray for my help, I will pray for them and I will help, because God says me to do so. It's in the Bible. I will follow the Bible, because I know that this life now is nothing comparatively to what is ahead. So I it's hard to explain the face. It's just, it is. I'm helping now here. We have a group of traditional Catholics that were, in the US called domestic terrorists in the FBI node, and many of them now moved to Russia. I am a Russian Orthodox. Why would I help them to establish here a church? They are legal now, they're registered, it's all okay. They have a little chapel now, but I want for them better conditions. I'm not Catholic, why shall I do so? Because I'm Christian. Okay?
Well, so,
help to a Muslim, to a Christian, to anyone who needs help.
On that note, I wanted to touch a bit on your work as a politician in Russia now, and you've touched on this issue of helping people to resettle from the West into Russia. I'd indicated earlier it's not something widely reported in the media in the West, but how important is that as a project for you, and what's your real motivation for doing it?
Well, my real motivation is to help people because nothing makes me more happy. Well, you can call me selfish and egoistic, but that's what gives me joy, helping others. When I see all these families setting up and having their houses and having jobs and their kids, step by step learning Russian language and, telling me stories about their own culture. I have this wonderful, fantastic family of Joseph Schutzman. He's an American who moved to Russia recently. He has seven kids and 3 girls. And these 3 girls asked me to translate Russian fairy tales into English. Well, I'm not great in translating fairy tales, but it's so charming. So for me, the motivation it's just the soul. Well, I don't know if my soul is pure because I'm the worst sinner you could imagine. Well, because I have to confess all the time because I misstep all the time. But I just have joy when people smile and people have their lives and families and they live as conservatives, and it's wonderful. Yeah, we have this program, and actually we just established a group called Welcome to Russia, and I serve on the board. We also have people there with dual citizenship from Germany and France and Australia and Austria. And so those are now Russian citizens. They serve on the board with me because we hold hands. We're holding hands to help to those who are looking for the Salvation Ark. And the Salvation Ark today for conservatives is Russia. And the word gets out. So we have many applications from those people.
Well, let me ask you, Ms. Butina, do you think more people will move if there is a peace deal?
I don't think it's related. Well, the number one reason why people come here is because they believe in God, they're conservatives, and they hate and they do not accept LGBT agenda. Well, if the US will come back being a conservative state and they stop the LGBT propaganda, then maybe people just, always prefer to keep their homes. But you should understand they come not because they want to, they come out of necessity because they know that their kids are trained now and against your will as parents to become LGBT, so you lose your future. So people come here not because they necessarily love Russia, but because they're looking for a safe place where they actually survive and they keep their culture and ancestries until their world and the times to come. That's why. So I don't think it's related to Ukraine or Russia or any military zone. It's more related to their hearts and souls.
It's an interesting point you raise about the LGBT community. What's the situation for those already in Russia? What's their current prospect?
Well, the LGBT in Russia is banned. And absolutely, the whole movement cannot propagate. You cannot go on the streets and do parades and we are very proud of that. We're very proud that we have God in our constitution. We are very proud that we have mother and father in our constitution because we don't take any other gender because God created us this way. And yes, Russia is a conservative state today. And yes, LGBT is not welcome here. Okay? I think that's fine. We don't put people on a treatment or something, but okay, whatever you believe, but you have not bring it to the kids at schools, not on the streets. You cannot do propaganda of LGBT, and you cannot have any official or unofficial movements of LGBT community. Okay, that's just our country. We're a sovereign country. That's what we decided. This is the path we decided for ourselves.
Well, Maria Butina, I thank you very much for making the time to join the show.
Thank you.
Cairo, one of the world's greatest megacities, Cairo. It is rich in its historic finery, while at the same time known for its extremely hot weather, traffic, and yes, noise and air pollution. While it is perhaps the city that tourists both love and hate, the experience makes it rather worth the challenges. It's got history that spans centuries, the city is full of vigor, and Cairo is a place to be when you're looking to experience the Egyptian street life. It is, in fact, where the only surviving wonder of the ancient world is. No words can describe the majestic view of the three 5,000-year-old pyramids on the Giza Plateau. One of the most popular ones is the King's Chamber, considered one of the deepest man-made silences on Earth. Of course, you can't miss the Sphinx. It is both an enormous sight and an overwhelming experience you will never forget. It serves as a guard of the pyramids with its lion body and pharaoh face. It is certainly an iconic monument of the ancient world. You can take hours-long camel rides to get through the pyramids. Despite the heat, dust, and other hurdles while traveling, it is definitely worth it. The pyramids of Cheops, also called the Great Pyramid or the Pyramid of Khufu, is the largest pyramid of the Giza group. You can explore the mysterious interiors of its narrow passages. There's also the Solar Boat Museum behind it, where you will see the ceremonial solar barks that's amazingly been restored to its original glory. On the south, there's a Pyramid of Khafre, which is also known as the Pyramid of Khafre. It also has an internal tunnel that invites you to explore it. Finally, there's the smaller Pyramid of Mycerinus, or the Pyramid of Menkaure. When it comes to shopping, you must visit Khan el-Khalili, which is considered to have one of the world's greatest shopping experiences. Its narrow alleyways have been established since 1400 AD, and up to now is still up and about with all sorts of trade, from tiny stores to cluttered workshops. For sports and recreation, find tennis courts around the south of Jazeera or ride the stables at the sports club. The Cairo Tower, built in 1961 by President Nasser, offers you an amazing view of the sunset at its observation deck.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on al-Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Naguib Sawiris, thank you so much for joining al-Arabiya.
Always a pleasure, Had.
I want to get a sense of where Naguib sees the world today.
I think the world is in a very dangerous mode because of the rise of new dictators in different jurisdictions who have consolidated power in one person. That includes the US, by the way, what's upcoming. And when there is a lack of accountability or a lack of, I don't know how the Senate and the Congress will deal in America with the new president.
Do you see him as a dictator, Donald Trump?
He's the democratic form of dictator. Yes, I see him as a dictator. I mean, this is what he would love to have. So now if he has the Senate and the Congress, we're going to see, but the Chinese president is a dictator. The Indian prime minister is a dictator, in my opinion. There is lots of other dictators in our region. So the world is being trapped through these individuals now that are shaping world destiny. Putin is a dictator. So all these powerful dictators, because of their countries, can do something crazy or stupid, and we end up now Russia is sending ballistic rockets to Ukraine. So if we're going to escalate, it could end up very, very badly. You don't control these individuals. If they give an order, they live because they are dictators. So the people around them just do what they tell them.
Yeah. You're not risk averse when it comes to working in countries under essentially dictatorships. You've worked in North Korea, you've worked elsewhere, the opportunities.
I don't try to mix my political views with my business, But I have a passion to go places where I have a soft spot for, like I feel like I want to do something which will be remembered. I would go to a country that nobody wants to go because I want to build something that has never been built before. So when I'm not there after many years and I die, they say, well, there was this Egyptian investor, he came here, he promised he will do 1, 2, 3, and he did 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and did something great. So I get well remembered. And
but you don't shy away.
No, I never shy away, you see, I fear nothing or nobody and except God, So people think sometimes I'm crazy, and I try to explain to them it's not being brave, it's about my faith. I believe God is on my side, so nobody can stand in my way.
What do you think about the situation in the region today?
Also very bad, very sad everywhere. You see, we still have problems in Libya divided between two sections, and there's still some uncertainty. You have Syria with uncertainty, and 3, 4 other countries meddling in Syrian affairs. Look at Lebanon, what's happening now with the destruction of Lebanon, this beautiful country with beautiful people. They're paying a price for some military force that took over Lebanon by force and ignoring all the facts of Sudan, a disaster. The two fractions are having a war where they know no one will win. So they'll keep just breaking down, destroying, and who's paying the price? The civilian people who are now 18 million stranded. There's hunger threats, and one party is also very, how can I say, very stubborn.
You're invested in Sudan, right?
Yes. Yeah. No, you name it, wherever there are problems, you find me there.
There you are. There you are. Tell me this, when you take a step back and think about the media landscape, for example, Comcast has decided to offload CNBC, MSNBC, several of the brands that were under their umbrella. They've moved away from cable, in a sense. How do you see this all evolving?
You see, media is a very difficult business. Very difficult to make money in media. Usually, you guys, you take your salaries, you take your bonuses, we pay for cost and everything. When it comes to income, now what is the income? Advertising is coming totally down. Social media now is taking over. So, no income. For Comcast, the original idea was to buy content. So they thought this is content. Now they see that it has changed completely.
With Peacock,
yes, exactly. So, I see
it's difficult to stay ahead in that.
I see the media will lose influence. Digital, social media will take over. So whoever didn't do the shift is going to suffer.
So in the interest in purchasing legacy assets like CNBC or MSNBC?
No. They're dying assets.
Yeah. And
also because we started a platform here, a digital platform for the young people, the young millennials, the people who want to understand how to become an entrepreneur, how to be able to get money if you're from venture capitalists, how to advance, what are the main exciting new areas in business, So all these other traditional stations, they're still with the stock exchange and the reviews of the companies and like that, they haven't.
They're not interactive.
They haven't evolved.
Walk me through this one. When you see tweets from Elon Musk, perhaps jokingly suggesting he might purchase MSNBC, do you see that happening?
I don't know, but he's not been known. I mean, I thought when he bought Twitter that this was a very bad investment, And look what he's done, So you never know. I mean, look, the guy is a genius. And if you don't like him, then there's something wrong about you, not about him.
Do you think it's worrying, the relationship he has, the bromance he has with Donald Trump? Or was it inevitable?
No, it's actually interesting to show you how we can turn tables. You see, we capitalists or entrepreneurs, we also like people to understand our value. So when you go against us, okay, you have to be prepared for a fight, see, because we are more imaginative. And what's an entrepreneur? He has an imagination, he has fantasy, but he has also the might of persistence. So you want to go to war against someone like us? Be my guest, you know, him or me or anyone else.
You're based at least part of the time here in Dubai. You've grown your business here. Where are the opportunities that you see?
Dubai and Abu Dhabi and the Emirates, you smell the money in the air. You see, I mean, opportunities are immense here. And tell me why. Because there is no interference. If you're an honest businessman and you have a good idea and you have a plan and you'll obey by the rules, you're so welcomed here. The ease of doing business, the ease of traveling in and out, the ease of administrative issues. There's no place in the world like here, you know. And I believe Saudi Arabia is going in the right way, and they will achieve what these people are here, but they need to be faster because people here will not stop advancing. You know, the rulers here, they wake up in the morning with one thought only: what can we do better for our people and for our guests or for our, see? So, and they sit and they come up with a new idea, with a new action, and then they execute. Where else? You know, most other countries, people are entangled in their routine meetings with some ambassador or some visitors or some crisis in the region or this and that. Here, nothing is stopping the progress, you know.
Where else would you invest? Because you're always looking for new opportunities. What's interesting to you? Would you put money in a place, for example, like Russia?
No, I will not put money in Russia because I'm standing with Ukraine, clearly. You see, I think what Putin should have done is he should have told them, look, guys, don't go into NATO because we believe this is a security threat to ourselves, you know. And if you go, I will come in. I will march in and it will be war. I think the Ukrainians would have taken his words seriously, and they would have delayed this issue with the NATO, you know, and we would have prevented the war. But he didn't do that. He just woke up one day and decided, now I'm marching in.
Yeah.
He says, well, we tried, and this. No, he didn't put it in a clarity like that. It's like, okay, because he has to acknowledge the fact that it's Ukraine's right to decide who they want to join and what they want to do. So he had to put a very serious message first. What was he worried about? That they will make defenses and prepare? And like, you see, he tried to invade Kiev in the first weeks of and before the whole world helped Ukraine, and they stood strong because it was their national honor, you know. So I would not do that. I will never.
Money done in Ukraine.
Yes, of course.
What looks interesting to you there? Because they need investment in every
everything.
sector. Yeah.
Everything.
Energy, infrastructure.
Everything. There's everything there. Hospitality, hotels, you know, there's a lot of mining, still many mining opportunities now, and with all this.
So is it more interesting to look at a place like Ukraine than Western Europe?
No, there's just more money to be made. In Western Europe, the competition is higher. Everything is already too regulated. Everything is done. There is a big, giant companies that will compete against you. I mean, you have to go where you, as a businessman coming from Egypt with limited resources, can do something and not have too much competition.
Do you worry about the future of Europe?
Yes, I worry. I criticize this Brexit departure of the UK. I mean, it's. So what's one of the most stupidest decisions in the history of mankind? They were part of Europe. They're a necessary part of Europe because also Europe has the same enemies, has the same challenges. What the hell did they go out like that? They lost all the investors from other countries. They lost their manpower. Now when you go in restaurants or they tell you, sorry, we have to work only a few days because we can't find the manpower. Now you have to get a visa at the airport to export goods. I mean, it is the most... And a decision like that should have been obtained by absolute majority, which means above 70% or above, not by 51%, which means it was the most ridiculous decision ever. You know?
Would you invest under a Labour government?
No.
Keir Starmer's government? Why?
Because they started on the wrong foot. They started with taxes and taxation and expelling the foreigners by canceling the
putting business out of business.
Yeah, no.
Not a thing.
No.
And in Europe more generally?
I like Greece. Yeah. I like Greece because it's in Europe, but it has some resemblance to our world, and the people are very nice. And I like Italy. I invested in Italy. My biggest investment in my whole career was in Italy, I bought wind for 15 billion euros, in the history of LBOs or investments, it's the highest from one individual, Yeah.
Tell me this. When you look at what's happening in the market today, you're a huge proponent of gold. Where do you see that headed?
You see, we had this question 4 years when you had our interview.
And everybody thought you were crazy.
And where did it go now? It's at 2,700, I was right because it's based on my experience in the mining industry. New gold mines take 6-7 years to start producing from the day you start exploration, which means that the velocity of new mines coming into production is much slower than the consumption. Coupled with the tensions in the world now, and so the Russians and the Chinese are massing up their gold reserves. Why? Because it's a universe currency. They don't want to be hostage to the dollar. Okay? So under this demand is here, it's going very fast, and the offering is very slow. And gold is gold.
Yeah. You mentioned hostage to the dollar. How worrying is a Trump administration in your mind, whether it be with regards to the Fed or the Trump tariffs?
I think we are going to be entertained in the next 4 years. Massively, because you will have a disruptor, which is Donald Trump, and if he disrupts in the right areas, like I like his disruption for the administration, because in America the bureaucracy and the administration, and mostly fueled by the Democrats.
You're not surprised they lost?
No, I was not surprised they lost because look at it, very very simple. Biden should have left 6 months or a year earlier. She was not the most perfect candidate to be chosen. She was chosen in a hasty manner. She didn't present her case very well at all, in my personal opinion. So they were going to lose anyhow. If they would have put someone like Bill Clinton or that caliber or George Bush the father, or they would have won if they would characters like that, But they came up with a very bad candidate in the last minute. Yes. Of course they lose.
Do you think it was the woke?
Because Donald Trump would have had a lot of people who don't like him. So this would have worked for them,
The woke narrative, that we have to be politically correct. Do you think that is over?
She should have woke up, not she was in another planet. I was looking at her and thinking, oh my God, that's imagine this. She would be a president of the United States of America. America always surprises me with their last candidates. Always, they don't manage to get really the very bad choices at the end. But no, I think you can say things. She had something also working against her. She was there for 4 years. What can she show for? Zero.
Yeah. Tell me this. When you think about business and politics, it was once explained to me by a friend of ours, if you have the money, you want the power, and if you have the power, you want the money. Businessmen going into politics, does that work?
Very bad idea. I used to admire and love the late Prime Minister of Lebanon, Rafiq Hariri. And I was in a conference here in Dubai where he attended with Sheikh Mohammed and the others in front, and it was about was a financial conference mixed, So I made a statement, said, why don't you leave the Palestinian problem to the businessmen? We can solve it, instead of the politicians who failed over these years to provide peace. And after I finished, he called me and told me, Naguib, don't do my mistake. Don't go into politics if you're because you're a successful businessman. Don't go into politics. 1 week before he was assassinated.
Really?
So I took the advice very seriously. I make my opinions. I'm opinionated, you know. I can't sit tight and not say when I see something wrong, especially when it concerns my country, okay? Or when it concerns a country I love, like Lebanon or any other place, you know. But it's a bad idea.
Yeah. Speaking of Lebanon, how do you see this playing out for the Lebanese? Because the United States has essentially greenlit everything that Israel's done.
I think Israel has done a big mistake in the way they handled this crisis of the terror attack of October 7, you know, because I think when they will sit back and see they've alienated a lot of the people in the world who have a conscience. You can't kill 42,000 people and feel that we will not sympathize with the Palestinian people, you know, like we sympathize with the victims of October 7. You know, this was a dreadful. But if you don't want me to deny the Holocaust, I cannot deny also, and I hate people who deny the Holocaust. You don't deny that there are 42,000 innocent people died. You didn't get the bad guys. The bad guys, how many of these 42,000 people were Hamas? 14,000 children were in Hamas, so they were not. So you can't prevent the world of feeling sorry for this immense victim, even if you are friendly to Israel, you know. So I believe the American administration has not tried to put some sanity into the situation. Look at now, the hostages are not back. Gaza is totally ruined. 40,000 people died. Now they're destroying in Lebanon, you know, and now they will stop before Hezbollah is finished. So they will stop and leave Hezbollah still there. So,
which was supposedly the point.
Yeah, so I don't know.
For Lebanon.
But Netanyahu also.
Do you think that that was a correct ruling by the International Criminal Court?
It stands for the 42,000 innocent souls that died. Yeah. The question is, you want to get the bad guys? Get the bad guys. You are intelligent, you have technology, you showed it your technology in Lebanon, you know. So why do you make what we call a general punishment? You know? The people of Gaza were occupied by Hamas. The simple people not all the people in Gaza wanted Hamas or accepted Hamas. Because Hamas was a dictatorial power on the people there. They didn't allow them to voice any other opinion. If you were not with them, they would take you and drag you and jail you with no. So the people were also oppressed. So you killed the oppressed people.
Yeah. What happens next in your mind? Does Trump come into office and put an end to wars? Or is the Middle East beyond his abilities?
No, it's not beyond, because he will have a lot of influence on the Arab countries. But he has a tendency to think that everything will be solved through money and business, you know, which is not right, because he forgets that people have now hate inside them. People have nationalistic feelings about their land, you know. You can't offer me money and you will take my home, you know. So I think he's made a statement which is, in my personal opinion, ridiculous, saying Israel should be bigger. On whose account? On our account. Let them come and take 1 centimeter from Egypt. We will go to war. Yeah. Nobody, doesn't understand the sovereign right of your land. So you want to be bigger in where? You go to the sea, then maybe they can put some more land in the sea.
Dredging. What about Egypt today?
Yeah, Egypt is not to what I would like it to be, you know. It's not to what I would like it to be, you know.
What needs to change?
I mean, this is a bit of that's where I get into trouble, you know, with questions like that. So I don't want to say, but I say we need more freedom. We need to support the private sector and open the doors completely. We need to eliminate the competition of the public sector and the army and the business. We need to restore the political life by allowing real elections and real
debate, real conversation.
We need a parliament that is not based on interest groups or people who paid money to become an MP. It's a lot of changes are needed. You know.
Do you imagine we'd be talking about these things 10 years ago in terms of the future of Egypt?
Well, to be honest, nobody expected when we got the Muslim Brotherhood out of Egypt and we welcomed President Sisi that this is going to be the way forward that has happened, you know.
Yeah. And it's disappointing.
You said it. You said it.
Walk me through Monify. Tell me what this platform's all about. What led you to this? I know originally you were thinking...
So Monify is I always wanted to have a financial station or a platform, but that is unique, that is not going against CNBC or Bloomberg because we don't have the budget anyhow. But that we...
And linear may be over.
Sorry? Of course, yeah. And that's why you had to go and cater for the young generation, the millennials, and see what they like, what are they interested in, and most of them, they would like to be an entrepreneur. They would like to start their own business. So what this station is going to do is going to tell them, where are the future investment opportunities? Is it in space? Is it in digital or Bitcoin or where? And how to start their businesses, how to approach venture capital companies, and
it also gives you a leg up yourself because you're seeing these companies at the most nascent.
Yes, and also me, I'm very interested into promoting the youth. I never refuse an opportunity to speak to the young people, to explain to them, take their questions, and give them advice. So now I will have a platform that will do exactly that. You know, it's just in the beginning now. We're going to add on it. You know, we have to introduce artificial intelligence into it to reduce our cost. We have to do a newsroom, you know, that is different. We have to see also how we will get some income, because now the advertising income is not really a main source now. So we have to be very innovative how we can do an interaction with our viewers and get some money out of that relation. Yes, something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Tell me this.
It's difficult.
No doubt. Tell me this, though. What inspired you to do this?
As I told you, I'm in times of my life now where I want to give back to society. So my family, we have a very big social organization called the Sawiris Foundation. It spends, I think, 1 to 2 billion pounds a year into Egypt, trying to create jobs, help all the NGOs that are providing jobs or training or medical or education. So this is good, and it's an institution, okay? But because I am egocentric a bit, you know, so I want to do something that would be named after me, like a great good deed. So I consider that one of them. In the same thing, I think that the Emirates here, they need a new financial station, because the stock markets here are now booming, especially in Abu Dhabi now with all the restructuring that has, the brilliant restructuring that has happened, you know. So I believe we are in the right spot, and then we're in a place here where ease of doing business is clear. Everything is very easy here, you know. We got our license like that, everything.
Yeah. You mentioned AI. When you look at technology today, and of course it's developing rapidly, what in your mind is going to be the challenge there? Because I do so often stories about energy using AI.
Yeah, people have talked a lot about that. The challenges are clear. You're going to not need half of your manpower. People will lose their jobs. So what's the plan for these people? Yeah. Okay. The other problem is the misuse. You will have more of now fake news through AI. You will be able to imitate the voice, the look. So whom will we believe when we see now a video in 5 years? Yeah. Is it true? It's not true. How about criminality? I mean, I go ChatGPT. How can I rob a bank? Or you know, how can I open a safe model so and so and so? Imagine if it gives you the answer. Yeah. So easy. Everything is going to be easier. Even fraud, corruption, criminality, everything. So it's a very dangerous era we're going to go in, you know. So unless there will be, it will be regulated, and there will going to be laws that tell you what you can do and what you cannot do.
Is that going to require some kind of global understanding, like we had in the internet?
Yes, exactly.
Early days,
exactly.
Bill Clinton.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me this. Okay, so beyond AI, beyond the technology of everything, what's exciting to you? Is it the fact that you're actually a DJ?
Yeah, you will laugh, but when I DJ, I love music. Yeah. So it's moments.
I've seen you dance.
Yeah, it's moments of my happiness. Yeah. I love music. And when I DJ, I know I have a good taste in the choice of the music I choose.
Yes.
And I see the response of people. It just puts me alive. It makes me feel alive, you know. And maybe you don't know, but I never grew over 30 years. I never grew up.
So is that your advice? Don't grow up.
Don't grow up, because it's stupid to grow up.
Yeah.
You know, if you keep a young spirit like I think I have, I never grow up, and I don't want to grow up. I prefer to go out with the age group where I stopped growing up, 30s. That's my favorite age group.
Love it. Cheers to that.
Thank you.
Naguib Sawiris, thank you so much
You're
for joining
welcome.
Al-Arabiya.
Thank you, Adley.
At Al-Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on al-Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al-Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, as Syrians look for clues as to what happened to their loved ones after 5 decades of Assad rule, the White Helmets say they've called off their search operation at the notorious Sednaya prison. Syria's new leaders offer rewards as they vow to track down former Assad regime officials responsible for torture and war crimes. And a war monitor says that Israel has carried out more than 300 airstrikes across Syria in recent days. The UN is warning Israel that this needs to stop. Hello and welcome to the programme. We're going to take you straight to Syria. It's been dubbed the human slaughterhouse. I'm talking about the notorious Sednaya prison, once controlled by the ousted Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Well, as soon as it was liberated by Syrian opposition forces, many Syrians rushed to the vicinity in search of their loved ones who'd been detained by the Syrian government for years. Well, as former prisoners reunite with their families, questions remain about the prison's secret sections and the full extent of its brutal history under the Assad regime. Well, for more on this, we're joined now by Dr. Rim Turkmani, who is director of the Syria Conflict Research Programme at the London School of Economics, whose cousin Abdullah was detained in Syria in 2016 at the age of 18. He has not been heard of since. Thank you for joining us once again, Dr. Turkmani. The truth is emerging. Atrocities on a scale few people had imagined when we look at what happened, for example, at Sednaya. I mean, is what we're seeing worse than anything you'd imagined?
Absolutely. It's worse than the worst thing we imagined. We didn't realize the scale, what was going on inside the prison, the torture machines, the people who came out, like who spent decades and decades of their lives looking like ghosts. It's horror beyond imagination. And what is most horrible is the people who don't come out. The list of people who disappeared in Syria, who were arrested and then disappeared, is more than 100,000. And sadly, only a small number of those people came out alive. So the worst thing yesterday was not what we've seen inside the prison, it's what we haven't seen. is the people who didn't show up.
And of course, you and your family, as I said in the introduction, have experienced tragedy at the hands of Bashar al-Assad and his ruthless regime. Tell us your cousin's story. Tell us about Abdullah.
There are so many stories. Abdullah is one of them, and he was detained when he was only 18 years old in Homs. He was actually detained with his mother and uncle who were with him in the flat at that time. And the only reason they arrested the others is just to add pressure on him, to break him, so he, quote unquote, confess. And he disappeared into Saydnaya, and we couldn't get any news about him since then. Every time we try, they say chances that actually he was killed there. And no one wanted to believe. His mother didn't want to believe. She already lost her husband during the conflict, and the rest of her family had to flee the country. She was living on her own in a flat in Homs, refusing to go anywhere since then, since 2016. And her excuse was she has to be at home so that if he's released and come back home, she has to open the door to him. He shouldn't find the house empty. Sadly, desperately, she was texting me the whole time, Reem, did you hear anything? Did they finish finding more people in Saydnaya? And my heart just broke as I had to tell her that actually there are no more people. No one else is alive. And I had to tell her that, and it was just so heartbreaking having to do it. And I felt, well, she should know rather than continue to live under this unimaginable pain. She needs to start the grieving process, right? And yeah, so, and you can imagine how many other mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers who were going under this yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, a horrific ordeal for you and your family. I mean, what I found most shocking about the testimony you just gave there was how they used your cousin's mother, your aunt, as a weapon, a means to apply further pressure on an 18-year-old boy. As you're saying, absolutely shocking. I mean, has there now come a point where, you know, looking through the prison documents, that hope has been abandoned, or could he be being held in a different prison and not necessarily at Saydnaya?
Every other prison we know of have been opened and people have been released. Detention center and mukhabarat branches all been open. There could always be some rooms. There were rumors or news about some smaller detention centers in the houses of some of the officers, but I mean, there will be only 10, 20 people there. I mean, the chances are almost non-existent. And as I said, it's so many stories. I mean, yesterday I was speaking to another cousin who was also detained, and it's a she this time, and she was only detained actually and locked in for more than 3 years to add pressure on another family member, on her husband, and who was actually also detained, but on her father-in-law, who the regime accused to have been involved in the public movement against it. And she was 9 months pregnant when she was arrested. She gave birth inside the prison. Her baby, the first 40 days of her baby's life, were inside the prison. And then they took the baby forcibly from her, and they put the baby in an orphanage. The grandparents were begging to have that baby so they can look after her. And the regime would refuse, and they say, this is a musadarat, meaning confiscated material. So the baby was considered as an asset that was confiscated, and they put her in an orphanage to grow without her mother. The happy ending is now the mother has been released in a prisoner exchange. She is united with her children, living with them safely. But you can imagine the horror she had to live through. And yesterday, when she was watching the images, she called me and she said, "Oh my God, I've seen the room where I was imprisoned yesterday in the media. It was in the Al-Mazzi airport. She's seen it. She said, that's where I was all these years. That's where So she's seen it. I mean, it's just, it's unimaginable. I mean, the pain and horror all these people went through.
I mean, and all the while...
She's the lucky one who came out alive, Imagine how many people lived and died inside these prisons.
Indeed. I mean, 500,000 people died, 100,000, as you say, disappeared. And all the while, the man who was at the helm of this regime, Bashar al-Assad, has got asylum, we understand, in Moscow. Do you have any hope that he will one day face justice for what he is responsible for?
I hope he will face justice. But now that he's in the hand of Russia, that will all be subject to some international deals and negotiations. But what I'm more concerned about right now is to prevent the rise of yet another dictator. The prospect in Syria is not good right now. We got rid of Assad, but the prospect of having yet another dictator is strong and is real. And it looks, by the look of it, we're changing just one ideology with another. But everything we're seeing is very concerning. The head of HTS, who now is claiming power over Syria, has prisons which are packed in Idlib, packed with people who just dare to oppose him. So am I optimistic? I'm not.
I mean, tell us a little bit about daily life in Syria, because you've still got family there, as we've been talking about your family quite a lot. Some of them are in Damascus. I understand you've got siblings who are there. What's their day-to-day life? And what does it feel like to them waking up today for the third day without Bashar al-Assad in charge of their country? Does it feel safe to walk the streets? Have they got adequate provisions? What's their daily reality like?
Okay, so the daily reality really differs from one city to the other. In Homs, things are a little bit more under control. Not much, but a bit more. Some shops started opening, slow comeback of daily life, but still people are concerned. In Damascus, however, it's completely different. My sister, texted me from there, said, you're all rejoicing, but for us, Damascus turned into a big prison right now. They don't dare to get out of the house because there's firing everywhere, arms everywhere. The different armed groups who seized Damascus are now fighting over Damascus, and they're filling the city with just, random shootings and clashes everywhere. It's difficult in Damascus right now, and there are big questions about what's going to come next.
I mean, in terms of which direction Syria takes, I mean, I think the international community would love to see something that looks like an inclusive government there that represents the different groups, the Kurds, the different sects of all the different religions that are there. I mean, as things currently stand, I mean, it doesn't sound like you think that's likely to happen anytime soon.
I don't see any inclusive government emerging from the current reality in Syria, but we need every pressure by the international community, by the neighboring Arab countries, to ensure that we get an inclusive, legitimate governing body in Syria very soon. We already have the UN infrastructure and Resolution 2254 that has a roadmap for Syria. It's a bit out of date, but it's still what's in it really has the blueprint for a transition, orderly transition in Syria, an inclusive one. And we really need to unite about that. I don't think it's in the best interest of any Arab country to see an extreme organization in control of any other Arab country, not on its borders. It's in their interest to see something inclusive and stable. Right now, the prospect of an extreme organization being in control of the country is raising alarms all around Syria among not only the minorities who had fears, historic fears, but also among the rest of the Syrians. Nobody is thinking about them. They're all concerned. They're all worried. And if this doesn't change, we're really risking yet another bloody episode of civil war. And I'm sorry about this. I know everyone is rejoicing. We're all happy to have got rid of the regime, but we should be mindful of all the risks coming ahead.
And in fact, one of the arguments that was perpetually used by Bashar al-Assad and those who supported him was that he was the only person, or someone like him, was the only way of holding the country together and protecting all of these minorities. Do you think that perhaps there was some truth to that argument? And the other part of this question is, do you see Syria fragmenting into a series of smaller countries?
Sadly, the Assad let me repeat this. Assad supporters' motto was al-Assad or nahraq al-balad, meaning either Assad or we'll burn the country. And I think Assad, before leaving Syria, created such an environment. He created the conditions for the country to be burned. He left it unprotected, no orderly transition, no arrangement, no delegation of power. So the country is up for grab from, different powers inside the country, but also outside. We've seen what Israel is doing today. And by the look of it, it's going to be a mess. Now, I don't see a divided country, as in international new borders being drawn in Syria. I think we're going to continue to see different conflict lines, including with the northeast. But I don't see a permanent division coming, and I could be wrong.
And of course, today sort of is a bit like the first day of a new school in a way for Syria, because state institutions have started to reopen, we're told today, banks, official centres of administration, possibly some schools as well. I mean, it doesn't sound to me like, from anything you've said up until now, that this feels like the beginning of a new and happy chapter for your country.
No, it's not. We could actually turn it into a happy chapter. So it depends on what we do right now. We all have a role to play, every one of us. The Syrians, ordinary Syrians, the civil society, the political forces, but also the internationals. We should all ensure that an inclusive governing body is going to emerge out of this and follow 2254. No one should recognize and deal with the head of terrorist organization who spent more than 13 years in al-Qaeda ranks and who is close to al-Zawahiri. I don't buy all this behavioral change they're talking about, because it's very recent. It's 13 days old. We have 13 years of very coercive behavior that we've seen to worry about. So we all have a role to play, and we can make this a happier ending than the current one we're seeing right now.
I mean, half of Syria's population is displaced, many of them internally, but then, of course, millions of people are around the world, a very talented diaspora right across the globe. I mean, they're a great asset. Do you see signs, or do you have any anecdotes from your friends, your contacts, that people might start thinking about coming back and perhaps helping and being part of this rebuilding process?
Now, the refugees in the regional countries across the borders are trying to go back right now. But if we're talking about the Syrian diaspora, the expertise, the wealth of people that we have around the globe, I spoke to many of them today, and they said, well, what's going on? We have to wait and see. How can we go in there right now? Many of them have spoken openly against SGS, and they would be worried to go back. Many of them are willing to do everything to help the country, but they don't want to do it under the leadership of al-Jolani. So that was very clear from everyone. Okay. This is why it's so risky to keep somebody like him in charge, or somebody on his behalf, like even if he appoints somebody from his side, because nobody wants to work under their leadership, or not everybody, only few people would like to work under such leadership.
Would you go back and visit, for example, or just too early to tell?
It's too early to tell.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Dr. Reem Turkmani, thank you for being with Al-Arabiya News.
Thank you so much.
Well, following on from the fall of the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, a number of European countries and the United Kingdom say they're suspending asylum procedures for Syrian nationals. Well, this comes as the UK faces a dilemma on the designation of the Syrian armed forces who toppled Assad. Well, the group in question, HTS, has been on the UK terror list ever since 2017 as an affiliate of al-Qaeda. Well, speaking to the press during a visit to Saudi Arabia, the British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer said that the Syrian situation was still in its early days and that no decision has been made with regards to the removal of that group from the UK terror list.
The situation is obviously very volatile in Syria. It is very good that Assad is gone, but it doesn't necessarily mean that what follows is settled by any means at all. It is really important we talk to our regional allies, our global allies, about the way forward, which has to be a political way forward. And that does mean, to answer your question, a rejection of terrorism, a rejection of violence. So we have to be really clear about the terms. Very early days, but they're the discussions that we're having with our allies. No decision is pending at all on this. It is far too early. At the moment, the focus has to be on talking to our allies, making sure that this is an opportunity for Syria, and therefore we have to work to make sure that it's a peaceful opportunity.
The British Prime Minister speaking there. Well, for more, we can speak now to Sir Mark Lyle-Grant, the former UK National Security Chief and Permanent Representative to the United Nations. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, Sir Mark. We just heard there from the British Prime Minister saying it's far too early to think about removing Hayat Tahrir al-Sham from the UK terror list. Do you agree with him?
Well, I think removing them from the terror list is a sort of technical step that will need to be taken at some point, certainly. I think more important in the short term is that there is some degree of contact between the British government and the new authority in Damascus, and that means Mohammed al-Julani in particular. So there are ways that we can have a communication, I think, with him without actually lifting HTS from the terrorist list. But that is something that I'm sure the government will move to relatively quickly.
Yeah, we've heard from the UN envoy for Syria saying that the reality so far is that HTS and the other armed groups have been sending out what he called good messages to the Syrian people. I don't know what you think of that, but I mean, clearly words are one thing, actions are another matter, aren't they?
Yes, I mean, I think the words of Julani in particular has been pretty positive, talking about respect for other communities and not pushing any of the sort of ancient jihadist agenda that HTS had in the past. So, yes, I think that's encouraging. But as you say, deeds are more important than just words. And it's not going to be a smooth, easy path from what was a brutal dictatorship under the Assads to some sort of Western liberal democracy. Obviously, that's not going to happen in Syria, and there's going to be a lot of bumps and difficulties along the way, as we have seen in Libya when Gaddafi was overthrown and in Iraq when Saddam Hussein was overthrown. You know, those countries are still in a certain degree of turmoil many years later. So we shouldn't expect immediate, rapid, positive change in Syria.
I mean, you mentioned Libya, there's Iraq, Afghanistan as well, other examples that can be looked at. Do you think lessons have been learnt? And do you think not one of the lessons that's been learnt is don't interfere with a homegrown sense of discontent, because that's when the problems begin, is when there's interference. And this, it would appear, has been homegrown. This was a genuine opposition movement that was not, it would appear, aided by any external forces. What are your thoughts?
Well, that would be ideal, but I'm afraid that that ship has sailed as far as Syria is concerned, because in addition to all the different internal forces, whether that's the Kurds or the Alawites or the HTS or the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army, there's huge divisions within the country, not to mention Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, who are still present in the country. But of course, there are many external forces already there. You've got the Russians and the Iranians, for whom this is a huge strategic defeat. But nonetheless, the Russians will be desperate to hang on to their military bases on the eastern Mediterranean. You've got the American troops who are in the south of the country, and you've got the Israelis who've carried out more than 300 strikes in the last couple of days, you know, essentially destroying all Syria's military capability. So there's a huge amount of external intervention already, and I don't think that is going to change in the next few weeks.
And lots of worry about possible chemical weapons stockpiles in Syria, and that's obviously something that the Israelis have been, well, they say they've been trying to target. I mean, how worried are you about the possibility of there being these depots full of chemical weapons there?
Well, I think there are probably some storage facilities in which there are chemical weapons. I don't know whether the Israelis are particularly targeting that. It seems to me that they're targeting a widespread Syrian military capability that could pose a potential future threat to Israel. But I don't know if they're particularly going after chemical sites. But clearly that would be very dangerous if they were. And all the countries in the region have a common interest in cleaning up the chemical weapons facilities that Syria had. So I don't expect there to be a huge international dispute on that particular aspect compared to the sort of political dispensation where there will be undoubtedly disagreements.
Syria is a huge country, and as you are well aware, geographically it's enormous and it has borders with 5 countries. Some of those borders looking quite porous at the moment, and I'm just wondering if you think that represents a threat to security in Europe and indeed across the region, the Middle East.
Well, at the moment, what we're seeing is a sort of flow of refugees back across the border into Syria. But that could change very quickly, and if there is an outbreak of further violence and some sort of civil war develops inside Syria yet again, then of course there'll be a refugee outflow. We mustn't forget that Al-Qaeda and ISIS are still present there. They have their own agenda, and if they are driven out of Syria, of course they will be moving into neighbouring countries in the region. So that is a concern. There are also many European nationals being held in camps or prisons in the sort of Kurdish-held areas in the north of the country, and they too must be dealt with at some point. So I think there's a lot of issues that are going to have to be addressed in the coming weeks.
I just want to ask you about the decision by Russia to provide asylum to Bashar al-Assad and his family. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that was the least they could do. For Russia, Syria was the main foothold in the Middle East. It was their most important ally in the region. They've got these 2 military bases, a military base and a naval air base and a naval base on the Eastern Mediterranean, which have become even more important as their navy is unable to operate freely in the Black Sea. They militarily involved themselves in Syria in 2015 in support of Assad to keep him in power. Now he has gone, and they were pretty helpless in sort of preventing what has happened, the revolution that's happened over the last couple of days. And so I think the least they could do was offer asylum to Assad himself and his family. I'm not surprised by that at all. I don't think there was anywhere else he could have gone.
And I know you've been following this story closely because as I was doing my research, I was told that your wife, 12 years ago, wrote to Asma al-Assad, the wife of Bashar al-Assad, calling on her to do something about the situation in Syria. I'm just wondering, what could she have done realistically? And I should point out for our viewers that she's a British national.
She is a British national, and that was one of the reasons why my wife, Sheila, and the wife of the German ambassador in New York wrote this open letter to Asma al-Assad, asking her to restrain her husband at a time when he was beginning to repress what was still largely peaceful demonstrations against his regime. This was in 2011. Of course, that letter did not have any direct impact. But I think it's a sign that people in Britain in particular are horrified that someone who has British nationality, that has gone through the British educational system, had a good job in the UK, then married Bashar al-Assad, sort of stood by while he became a despot and a tyrant and abused and tortured and killed many of his own nationals. I think it's a great sadness that she was not only witness to that, but obviously participated in it.
Can we blame her? I mean, some people have told us that Bashar al-Assad wasn't even in control himself and that he was just a sort of a puppet. And some have described him as being a prisoner in a cage of his father's making.
Well, I think there's probably some truth to that, but nonetheless, she stood by him. There was absolutely no sign that she distanced herself from her husband, as she could well have done, and therefore I think must take the blame for being associated with a particularly bloody tyrannical regime. I don't think she can escape blame for that, even though her hands, in a sort of personal sense, may not be filled with blood.
The new leadership in Damascus is talking about pursuing former senior officials in Assad's regime for torture, war crimes, a whole host of crimes. Many of them are suspected of having fled Syria or gone to parts of Syria where they won't be found. I mean, can the international community, and do you think the international community will and should help track those people down?
I think there will be an effort to target certain of the worst offenders when it comes to torture and abuse of prisoners in Syria. Yes, and I think the International Criminal Court may look more widely now, even at Assad himself. Syria is not a member of the International Criminal Court, so the jurisdiction is obviously limited. But nonetheless, I think there will be some attempts to bring to justice those who have behaved in a particularly heinous way. But it's important not to have a sort of widespread witch hunt against everyone who supported Assad in the country, and that it is focused on those who are personally involved in the worst criminal offences.
Just lastly, Sir Mark, I mean, it's been an extraordinary 10 days, as we've been saying, and now that the curtain has been lifted to some extent on the scale of the atrocities that the regime always denied. They always denied that they mistreated their people, but the reports came out nevertheless. But what stood out for you out of all the sort of revelations, all the reports, all the images that we've been able to see these last few days? What struck you the most?
Well, I think what struck me the most is the sort of widespread joy and relief of the ordinary Syrian people that the Assad dictatorship, which after all has lasted 50 years, you include Assad and his father, is finally over. And many people thought this day would never come. In terms of the sort of revelation of atrocities, I don't think I myself are at all surprised. We did an exhibition of papers and evidence, photos, etc. in the United Nations back in 2011, 2012. It was well known what was going on in these prisons in Damascus in particular. So I'm not surprised by some of the horrific revelations that are coming out. But I think what is striking for me is the joy of people, even in Latakia, even in the Alawite areas of Syria, there doesn't appear to be any love lost for the Assads as they depart the country.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Sir Mark Lyle-Grant, thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
So, after more than half a century of Assad family rule, Bashar al-Assad is no longer in office and his army has been defeated, leaving behind, according to several reports, stockpiles of weapons. Well, these include chemical weapons that are understood to have killed thousands of people, thousands of civilians during the Syrian civil war. Well, this brings to mind the harrowing images from the Damascus suburb of Ghouta in 2013. So what happens now to these weapons and what is being done to ensure they don't fall into the wrong hands? Well, just last week, before Assad's downfall, the US intelligence services said they were monitoring chemical weapons sites in Syria, looking for any signs that the government might try using remaining stockpiles to prevent opposition forces from seizing the capital. Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to William Alberg, who is former director of NATO's Arms Control, Disarmament and Weapons of Mass Destruction Non-Proliferation Centre. Thank you so much for being with us once again here on Al-Arabiya News. Let me just start by asking you, what sorts of weapons do you believe are hidden away in these depots across Syria?
Well, so in addition to conventional weapons of all types, missiles, rockets, artillery, anti-aircraft missiles, all these kinds of things, we also have intelligence that Syria has retained a fairly large stock of chemical weapons. And this includes sarin, VX, and chlorine that we either know that they have used since they were supposed to have destroyed all their stocks or have detected traces through inspections by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. In fact, on December 5th, Izumi Nakamitsu, the UN Secretary General's special representative for arms control, testified before the UN that there were still 19 issues unresolved related to the destruction of Syria's chemical weapons arsenal.
Okay, and of course this all as well dates back to 2013 when Assad is accused of carrying out those sarin gas attacks on Ghouta. More than 1,400 people died. And there was a Russian-American deal that was brokered at the time, whereby, as you've been saying, Syria was supposed to dispense with all of its supplies of chemical weapons. So what you're saying is that they've restocked, and perhaps they weren't entirely forthcoming in their declaration of what they had in their arsenal 10 years ago.
Exactly. There was the U.S.-Russian agreement to eliminate Syria's chemical weapons, and also Syria acceded to the Chemical Weapons Convention, which required Syria to declare exactly what they had, both in terms of manufacturing capability and stockpiles. And as soon as that agreement was signed, there were suspicions that they had not declared everything, because one of the shortcomings of the CWC, of the Chemical Weapons Convention, is you can't just go looking for undeclared sites. So Syria claimed that it destroyed everything that they declared. But again, if they didn't declare stuff, if they hid stuff away from that declaration, which is what we strongly suspect that they did, and we now have very firm evidence that they did, then it's very difficult to spot and destroy that under international agreements. So we believe that since 2013, they've maintained the stockpile, they've continued attacks, and again, as recent as last week, the UN declared that, and the OPCW confirmed that there are still huge unresolved issues, and the suspicion that there's very large stocks of sarin, VX, and chlorine chemical weapons.
So obviously there's major concern now. Syria's entered an uncertain new chapter. There's concern that these weapons could fall into the wrong hands, couldn't they?
Absolutely. Some of these chemical weapons are very easy to use. Chlorine, for instance, chlorine gas is very easy to deploy, and Syria has used it many times during the conflict. Al-Qaeda has used chemical weapons as well. So the fear is that these groups will use something more deadly like VX or sarin, which is unbelievably lethal and just horrific effects in terrorist attacks or in larger scale attacks against the new coalition that's in charge of Syria, or against other governments, against Turkey, against Iraq, against other countries in the region.
But shouldn't the organization that monitors chemical weapons, the OPCW, be on the ground and in the country, instead of the situation we're in right now, which is that Israel's carrying out airstrikes? And an extension of that question, is it dangerous to bomb a chemical weapons facility? I mean, doesn't that represent a risk in itself?
Well, ideally, yes, of course. Ideally, Syria would have declared everything that they had so that we knew exactly where the chemical weapons are and we could destroy them under international agreements. But they didn't. They hid the storage of a lot of the chemical weapons, and they didn't declare a number of facilities. So now we see airstrikes being carried out by Israel, possibly by the United States as well, to try to destroy these stockpiles. It is somewhat dangerous to destroy these chemical stocks through bombs. I mean, you would much rather do it through the chemical elimination processes that have been proven to be very, very safe. But when you have a choice between either leaving these facilities completely unguarded and chemical weapons open to be stolen by anyone, or destroying them through kinetic action, obviously Israel, for its own security, probably the US as well, is going to just try to destroy them. The good news, bad news, when you use a bomb to destroy the chemical weapons, it may aerosolize it, it may spread it, but hopefully any spread would be very, very localized. It would burn up in the heat of the explosion, and it would have relatively small effects on those around it. But there is a risk to people who are near those chemical storage facilities. Of course, Syria put them at risk by not declaring these sites to the OPCW, to the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, and destroying the stocks under international law. They violated UN Security Council resolutions, and they've put the people who live around these facilities at tremendous risk.
And just lastly, with regards to chemical weapons, before we move on to other aspects of the military activity in Syria at the moment, I mean, chemical and also biological weapons, you're saying chlorine quite easy to use, but others are not quite so easy to use, are they? Because they've got to be used in exactly the right proportions, and the chemicals and the agents have to be stored in exactly the right conditions, and they've got a sell-by date, haven't they?
That's right. When you talk about the more complex chemical weapons, especially binary agents, these are agents that are stored two inert chemical compounds separately, that when you mix them turn into something incredibly deadly that can kill people. They have to be mixed together properly. Usually they have to be filled in very special delivery mechanisms, specifically designed bombs, etc. You can't just take these things and smash them together and throw them and hope they'll work. They'll end up killing the people who are trying to use them. And you're right, some of them have limited shelf life because the active agents in the chemical weapons themselves are limited in use. Sometimes even if you fill a artillery shell or rocket with these chemical weapons, they can have corrosive effects on the weapons. There's a limited amount of time that you can fill them into the delivery system before it starts to render itself inoperative or to set off before it's launched. So there's still a risk that we may not find all the stocks quickly, that they may have been dispersed right before the collapse of the Syrian government. And so some of these chemical weapons may be found years from now. We just don't know, which again makes Syria's violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention even more worrisome and could have troubling effects for the region for years to come.
Okay, just moving away from chemical weapons and talking more broadly about some of the military hardware that the regime of Bashar al-Assad has left behind. I mean, Syria's new leaders, it would appear, have got something of an air force, something of a navy at their disposal, and at the same time Israel is carrying out all these airstrikes across Syrian territory. Is that with a view to absolutely erasing what's left of the air force and the navy and making sure that Syria needs to start at sort of ground zero militarily?
I certainly think that's what Israel's hope is to do, is to destroy as much of the military capability that any future government or terrorist organization might use against Syria. So we've seen the sinking of a number of naval vessels. On the one hand, I think Israel will want Syria to have a certain amount, or the new Syrian government, the HTS certainly, to have a certain amount of weapons necessary to continue to hold al-Qaeda or ISIL at bay. You don't want to leave a situation where the new government finds itself overrun by extremists. So I think Israel's trying to find a balance between the kinds of systems that threaten Israel directly, the longer range missiles and naval vessels and certain types of aircraft, while at the same time leaving an amount of weapons that Syria will need to be able to defend itself against these other groups. We have to remember, Syria, just because Damascus has fallen, Syria is not unified, whole, and at peace. It's still riven with conflicts. There's many, many armed groups, and management of that rather than descent into total chaos is in Israel's interest.
And there's another country we haven't talked about when it comes to defence and military hardware on the ground in Syria, and that is, of course, Russia, which has its Mediterranean base at Tartus. It's got an air base in Latakia province. I'm just wondering, I mean, Israel's got to be very careful, hasn't it, striking military hardware all around Syria, because some of it does belong to Russia. And I'm also just wondering whether you think Syria's new leaders are likely to allow Russia to maintain a presence on their soil.
Well, that's a really fascinating question and something that is a real unknown right now. We've seen a shift in how Moscow is talking about the new government. They've shifted from talking about armed insurgents to armed groups. So I think Russia's trying to moderate its diplomacy and probably to reach out to the new government to allow it to continue. For Russia, that air base and that naval base are of such critical importance to Russia's capability to project power in the Mediterranean and beyond. For instance, the naval base that you mentioned at Tartus, if that naval repair facility goes away, Russia would have less of a right to transit vessels from the Black Sea through the Straits through Turkish territory because of the Montreux Convention. The Montreux Convention only allows Russia access to the Mediterranean because of the Tartus repair facility. That's a little loophole in the Montreux Convention. So without that, Russia would be limited in the types and numbers of vessels that it can pass through from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean Sea. And this airbase Russia has used for tremendous numbers of operations across Northern Africa and Libya and other countries like that. So if the new government restricts Russia's use of Syrian territory, it would be really, really fascinating. It would really hamper Russia's future efforts. And as you mentioned, in terms of Israel destroying Russian equipment, I think Israel is going to be incredibly unsympathetic to Russia. Russia has supported Syria through thick and thin. Syria has become, before this recent upheaval, a transit point for Iran to move missiles and weapons to Hezbollah and Hamas. So I think Israel may be a little bit gleeful in terms of striking back at Russia and punishing Russia for its support and using Syria as a platform to harm Israeli interests. It'll be really interesting to see how the Israel-Russia relationship falls out now that Russia has lost a lot of its leverage in Syria.
And just lastly, I mean, it's been an extraordinary 10 days. I mean, very unpredictable and very unexpected series of outcomes. I just want to get your perspective now that you've had a couple of days to reflect on it. But how do you think Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and the other opposition forces managed to gain so much ground in so little time? What are your thoughts?
I think it's really an extraordinary confluence of factors, both because of Russia's complete distraction by its war on Ukraine and really hollowing out its forces in Syria and moving a lot of its heavy equipment and cutting off Syria from the Assad government from access to ammunition and resupply and airstrikes and all the things that Assad had relied upon to contain HTS. So I think they saw an extraordinary opportunity. Iran as well, completely distracted by the twin wars in Lebanon and in Gaza, and so not able to support Syrian forces as well. But I think even HTS could not have predicted the unbelievable successes that they've had, the complete collapse of the Syrian military, echoes of other cases where governments have just not been able to defend themselves. It just appears the Syrian military itself was just not willing to continue this fight. So a confluence of factors, plus Turkey getting much more involved in the conflict and seeing opportunity. It's truly an extraordinary moment where the Syrian government, once confronted with the absolute distraction of Russia and Iran and other conflicts, was simply unable to defend itself, and HTS was able to seize that moment with just an amazing campaign to seize Damascus. But we still have to recognize that although Assad has collapsed, as I mentioned before, the rest of the country still is in turmoil. There's many armed groups. So they've managed to knock Damascus out in an incredible, incredible moment. But it just goes to show when you rely on a country like Russia or Iran, who have so many other irons in the fire in terms of the chaos they're trying to sow in other regions, just not reliable partners, just not there for you when you really need them. And so a lot of the criticism that countries have pointed at Russia for their involvement in Ukraine, for their meddling all across the world, I think a lot of countries who have aligned with Russia are going to be second-guessing themselves, and Iran as well. Iran showing that when Assad was really up against it, Iran just melted away and was not willing to do everything they could to support the forces of Assad to defend Damascus.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. William Albert, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Tom.
Meanwhile, Israel is denying reports that its forces have penetrated into Syrian territory beyond the buffer zone near the Golan Heights. Well, ever since the weekend, the Israeli military has carried out a wave of heavy airstrikes right across Syria. Well, those strikes came on the heels of the collapse of Bashar al-Assad's government. Well, Israel is understood to have seized a roughly 400 square kilometre buffer zone near the Golan Heights inside Syrian territory. Well, in response to the Israeli heavy airstrikes, the UN Special Envoy to Syria has called on Israel to halt its military movements and bombardments inside Syria.
And then a very troubling development. We are continuing to see Israeli movements and bombardments into Syrian territory. This needs to stop.
Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to Yaakov Amidror, who's a retired Israeli Major General, former National Security Advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, today at Ginza in Washington. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. We've received reports about there being tanks close to the outskirts of Damascus. I mean, is that true? And if so, what would Israeli tanks be doing so close to the Syrian capital?
Not so close to the Syrian capital, but remember the Syrian capital is 36 kilometers from the borders of Israel. It's not 100 kilometers away. I mean, it's very close anyhow. So what Israel is doing, we understand that the group of rebels that came from Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and so on organizations are now taking the control of Syria. And we want to be sure that whatever their policy in the future will be, they will not be in a position to attack Israel. We learned from the history that those groups at the beginning, they speak very nicely, but at the end of the day, in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, they are becoming what they are, Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And we as Israel cannot allow it to have very close to our communities in the Golan Heights or having the military capabilities that Assad had. And this is why we are very active now.
What's your understanding? I mean, out of these 300 Israeli strikes or more now that have been carried out since Bashar al-Assad was toppled, what are the targets principally? What's Israel trying to achieve here?
The targets are either chemical weapon systems, missiles, and other military capabilities in air, sea, and land that we don't want. That those organizations, as I said, these are organizations which came from ISIS and Al-Qaeda together, will have these capabilities in their hands. It's too dangerous to the state of Israel. It's too dangerous to the Middle East. At the end, we have to take into consideration the fact of their views about Israel and their views about the relations between Islamic very extreme organizations and the other parts of the world, including Jews, Christians, and so on. So what we are doing is that just taking out of their hands all these capabilities that might be used in the future in irresponsible way by the new control, by the new regime in Syria.
I mean, obviously, no country wants to see Syria's new leadership or anyone else in Syria using chemical weapons. But is this really just Israel's fight? Because there are bodies, aren't there, like the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, and that is precisely their job, isn't it?
Yes, and they were very good in the past to do whatever is needed, and they do whatever is needed that Assad will not use it, and others in the Middle East. With all due respect to all those organizations, they didn't make any one step to have a situation in which they don't have military chemical capabilities. So I don't have an answer just to smile to your question. Knowing the history of those organizations, they never did what they're supposed to do.
Syria, of course, borders a number of countries, not just Israel at the Golan Heights, but other countries as well. How real do you think the risk is of spillover from any reignited conflict on Syrian soil into countries that border Syria?
It very much depends on the decision of the new rulers of Syria. They have an old issue with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and they might use their capabilities to deal with Hezbollah in Lebanon. It will not be so bad. They might think of exporting their ideas into Jordan and Iraq, and that will be very bad. So very much depends on their decision how to use the new situation when they are now controlling the state, unlike in the past. Remember that when Khamenei came from Paris to Tehran, he was very, very modest guy. He said that it will be another area and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, you know what happened in Tehran. This is the way of very extreme movement coming into being governments in countries. At the beginning, they are very modest, but at the end, we see their real face. Here, what they said up till now, at least, is not about exporting their extremist idea, but I don't know what will happen in the future. And if I would be the rulers of Jordan and Iraq, I will be very, very cautious in the future.
We heard from the Israeli Prime Minister shortly after the downfall of Bashar al-Assad, and he seemed to be taking some credit for Assad's downfall. I mean, do you think that's credit he deserves to be taking?
No question that I think that there is no even one one expert of the Middle East, they don't see the connection between the success of Israel of weakening Hezbollah and Iran, and the ability of the rebels to go into Syria and not facing both Iran and Hezbollah, fighting them in Syria. That happened in the past, but today it's different Iran after the attack of Israel. It's different Hezbollah. Hezbollah is much weaker than in the past and is not in a situation to help, was not in the situation to help Assad. So no question there is a strong connection between the success of Israel of bombing and killing the whole leadership of Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the fact that Iran is much weaker than in the past because of what we attack there, and because they don't have the proxies. They lost Hamas, and they lost a lot of what capacities of Hezbollah. And when these two organizations are very weak, Iran is standing vis-a-vis Israel directly, not through proxies. And the last time that Israel bombed in Iran lost its a lot of its defense capabilities. So I think that the fact that Israel succeeded to deal with Hezbollah and with Iran is very much connected to the success of the rebels, no question.
Okay, and in terms of these accusations leveled at Israel by some countries in the region and by the United Nations, I should add, that somehow Israel is trying to exploit the disarray in Syria for its own gain. How do you respond to that?
I think that Israel will be irresponsible if Israel will not prepare itself to a new situation in which the sons and the sons of Al Qaeda and ISIS are going close to our border, and Israel will not do something to be better prepared for such a situation. You know, as we know, what they have in mind, what is their policy, what is their ideology, and we should be prepared. And what we are doing now is to be better prepared to a decision that might be taken by those rebels, which represent very extreme ideas. I mean, I'm very glad for the Sunnis in Syria that they succeeded to topple the murderer from Damascus, Assad the son. But from our point of view, these people which came from Idlib are very bad people. They are representing very extreme views about the Middle East, about the Islamic, the Islam in the Middle East, and they are very, very against Israel. They had been in the past. I hope that they will not be in the future, but no can guarantee it. What they said about Israel in the past is very clear. Israel should be destroyed, and they want to reach the mosques in Jerusalem after they reach the mosques in Damascus. I'm quoting. So we have to be better prepared to this new situation. That's what we are doing. We will be better prepared after we succeed to neutralize a lot of the military capabilities that they might own in the future as the new rulers of Damascus. If it is chemical weapon systems or Navy capabilities. From our point of view, they will not have the ability to attack Israel, and will do whatever is needed to make sure that they will not be able to attack Israel.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you so much for speaking to us, retired Israeli Major General Yaakov Amidrol. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.
At al-Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al-Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Me and him are like telepathic, you know what I mean? I know my brother better than anybody else. When both come together, we have greatness.
The announcement that the British rock band Oasis is reuniting for a new tour 15 years after brothers Liam and Noel Gallagher's acrimonious split has caused a sensation in the UK. It's been the most talked about story for a week, with more than 1 million people scrambling for tickets to next year's gigs. And tickets are changing hands for as much as £10,000, over $13,000 on the resale market. Well, hits such as Wonderwall, Champagne Supernova and Don't Look Back in Anger will be performed at the UK's biggest arenas, with the tour then expected to go global. The announcement also reignited memories of one of the most explosive musical feuds in the industry's history, when the so-called Battle of Britpop divided the country between fans of Oasis and Blur in a race for superiority in the music charts. In the 30 years since, there have been plenty of musical feuds and fallouts, such as the tensions between hip-hop giants Drake and Kendrick Lamar, or Kanye West and Taylor Swift. But at that time, Blur versus Oasis became the biggest rock rivalry since the Beatles versus the Rolling Stones. And it's never really disappeared. A new stage play about the feud called The Battle is heading to London's West End next year. So who won the battle of the Britpop bands? Let's revisit the debate with a pair of music experts to look back at the anger and abuse that divided the country by geography, class and culture. Well, I'm joined now by British broadcaster and music journalist Adrian Goldberg and John Robb, editor of the music publication Louder Than War, whose recent interview with Noel Gallagher gave fans new hope of a reunion between these strange brothers. So John, I'm going to start with you and just like to revisit that infamous feud between Oasis and Blur. But let's start with the news of Oasis, which has caused quite a sensation among music fans in the UK and around the world. Tell me how you got that exclusive interview with Noel.
Well, the interview I did with Noel was actually for the Definitely Maybe album. They were going to, it came out last week. It was a release of it. They had 2 attempts to record it initially, and the one you actually get to hear is the 3rd attempt to record it. So Noel remixed the first 2 attempts. And Noel was going to do 1 interview for the album. He asked me to do the interview. So it was filmed for them, for Noel's people, Oasis people, wherever it was at the time. This is done months ago, so there's no sign on the band reforming. Now when I think about it, I don't think they'd actually reformed to the point of time doing the interview. And what I was saying before the interview, I'm obviously they wanted me to talk about the album in the interview, but I didn't really want the Noel v Liam thing, because kind of knowing them over the years, I know that there is an intense rivalry. They haven't spoken genuinely in 15 years, but I think if that's the only story that becomes out of the whole Oasis thing, you're kind of missing out on a lot of other stuff. And I said, wouldn't it be nice if you actually talked about the positive side of it? And he did. He was very nice about Liam. So when the interview got shown a week ago, which now seems like a year ago, people go, oh, God, this is a very different Noel. He's bigging up Liam and he's bigging up the band. Is there something going on? And 48 hours later, something did go on.
So your chat may have had some sway in the whole thing.
Yeah, I like to think that. Yeah, it's me personally reformed the band. I mean, I think Noel's a very smart operator, so I think he would have known the right time to do this. I think he picked exactly the right time to do this, didn't he? I mean, it's weird now we're in a position where the band actually seems bigger than they were in 1996. The amount of tickets they're selling for these live shows, or whatever cost they are for tickets, is higher than when they did the Nebworth 30 years ago, which seems crazy.
Well, let me bring in Adrian. And Adrian, why is this such a big deal for music fans in the UK and around the world?
I think you've got the phenomenon of nostalgia, people who remember Oasis from the first time round in the 90s. And of course, because the band split up, those people haven't had the opportunity to see the band for many, many years. But also, I think the band's musical influence has filtered down to their children. And I know that Oasis memes are massive on TikTok at the moment. Somebody getting a Liam Gallagher haircut on TikTok, a British model, has had 2.4 million views. On Instagram, searches for Oasis style. And this is even before the reunion, were quite a thing. So I think you've got the combination of nostalgia from parents who want to relive their youth, but also their children who got into the music. You know, clearly there's an enduring quality about the music of Oasis that their kids have bought into, and a very particular British fashion style as well.
Well, Adrian, there's also the fact that the parents would know about the feud between two of the most successful British bands in the 90s. There was, of course, that rivalry between Oasis and Blur. So how has that kind of come into the mix, Adrian?
Truthfully, these days, that's really gone. I think it was a very much of its moment in the mid-90s, very much beloved of the tabloids. You know, who doesn't love a band war? They were probably harking back to a time when John and I were scarcely born, to a Beatles versus Stones feud. So I think the people who ran the tabloids understood that there might be mileage. Clearly there was some degree of animosity between the bands, but ultimately now, I think all these years on, I think, truthfully, both bands stand in their own right. Both were significant bands of the 90s, and both still have a vital musical influence today. So I don't think, truthfully, that feud is selling tickets in 2024.
Well, I was going to ask John then, how, you know them, you've been close to these guys. How is the difference between the two bands, or how did that difference fuel the rivalry, and how did the fans embrace it at that time?
I think it's quite interesting because I think something outside the UK would be quite difficult to understand, but it was all about class, geographies, north, east, south, working class versus perceived middle class. Oasis kind of initially thought Blur were trying to jump on their bandwagon, and Blur probably thought Oasis trying to jump on their bandwagon. I mean, Noel Gallagher, when I interviewed about 20 years ago, he said that the music media and the music business had the stage set for Britpop, and Blur were going to be the main band in it. Then we turned up and they never forgave us. And I think even that part actually still gets played out to this day, because I think you see a lot of people in the UK music media not that comfortable with Oasis even like 30 years later. But I think it was Blur's manager. He was a brilliant operator who actually worked in the same newspaper as me and Adrian did at the time, who actually sort of created the initial Blur v Oasis thing, but then he just ran away because, like Adrian was saying, it's a great story. Everyone likes a band rivalry, you know, Beatles, Stones, Clash, Pistols, you know, T-Rex, Bowie. Some are more serious than others, but it creates all these little sort of debates around it. You know, which side are you on? Are you? And it's all kind of showbiz in a way as well, and it's like a showbiz idea of the class system in the UK, and which still goes on, and I think all our culture is riven with those kind of divisions and those kind of ideas.
But John, you know, knowing your friendship with the Gallaghers, is it fair to say that Blur were a little more magnanimous while the Gallagher brothers were merciless in their put-downs that ranged from like hilarious, typically British one-liners to actually some quite shocking comments?
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff said wasn't that great, was it? But I think both sides. I don't think there was much evidence of anybody being that magnanimous at the peak of it. I think they're both pressing each other's buttons. You know, I think obviously there was a fun side to it. It's great getting the tabloid headlines, but I think there's a serious side to it as well. But after a few years, it like Adrian was saying, it stopped. You know, Noel's made records with Damon, and there's a mutual respect between most of them nowadays, isn't there?
And you know, Adrian, John was saying about how everyone loves a bit of rivalry between various stars and bands and so on. How much do you believe the rivalry was genuine? How much was actually blown up to the benefit of both bands?
Well, I think at the time it was genuine. As you say, there were some quite bitter comments going to and fro. And as John suggests, it started off maybe as one of those little bits of hype that the music papers, of which John and I were part, were happy to seize on. But then it became a whole tabloid rivalry, and every comment was seized on, every comment was blown up. So I think there was a real thing behind it. But I really do think that was then and this is now. And I don't think it's particularly germane to the music buying public in 2024. And you also have to look, you know, if you're thinking about Oasis, this is a band who went worldwide. They had 3 platinum selling albums in the United States. They had MTV Europe Awards. I think they won 4 MTV Europe Awards. So this was something that played out in the UK press, but I don't think Oasis would have had that global success. I think they would have had that in any event. I don't think they would have had it if they didn't have great songs that were able to endure. I just kind of think that moment's gone, you know.
Right. Well, I was going to say, though, just for those who weren't born at that time, John, perhaps things came to a head during the race for #1 in 1995 to get that top single. Tell me about that and the effect it had on the country at the time.
Well, I think that was the peak of it, really, one of the great Britpop wars. You know, I think it was Alan McGee that said that when he, we lost the battle, but we actually won the war, because the Oasis album came out. They didn't get the #1 single, but their album comes out and it's one of the best-selling albums ever in the UK. I think it's, in the end, if you look at the Beatles Stones thing, I always think this about that. You know, the Stones were the biggest band in the 60s, but the Beatles were the biggest phenomenon in the 60s. You know, you can only get to a certain level as a band. You're not going to get any bigger. But some bands go beyond that into the stratosphere. And I think in the UK especially, that's what Oasis did. They became a band that everybody had an opinion on, and Blur were just a really big band. And that was kind of the result of what came out of the Britpop wars.
Yeah, you described what happened there, but let me ask you, John, starting with you and maybe get Adrian's perspective afterwards. Numbers apart, I mean, maybe an unfair question, but who do you think made the better music and which has stood the test of time?
I think they're both really good. I think they both do really different functions. I mean, Blur are fantastically inventive, but then, of course, Damon Albarn is a brilliant magpie as well. I don't think anybody's, you know, people always have this idea that Oasis, everything they stole was off the Beatles, but knowing Noel Gallagher, well, I know he likes a lot of music way beyond the Beatles. He doesn't just have the Beatles red and blue records. You know, he's really into post-punk. He's really into obscure underground bands. You know, there's a lot of stuff in that melting pot. There's a few nicks in there, but every band nicks spits the stuff off other people anyway. And so I think there was with Blur, there was a kind of like an artful inventiveness to their music, but it takes an equal amount of skill to write a song that 80,000 people in the field can completely connect with. And it's those kind of everyman songs are difficult to write. Otherwise, there'd be hundreds and hundreds of bands doing them. I think there's equal but very different talents at play here.
Well, Adrian, what's your take on that, and which has stood the
Well, no, listen, I'm sad to agree with John, really. I think if you, from a kind of the traditional music critic's point of view, I think Blur are probably seen as the more artistic band, seen as the more creative. I think Damon Albarn is the individual of all of the people involved in this particular discussion who has kind of continued to push at boundaries musically. But if I go for an evening out in the pubs and clubs of the West Midlands, which is home to neither Oasis or Blur, and they might have a guitarist there, a singer-songwriter just entertaining people in the pub, what will we hear? We won't hear a Blur song. We will hear, in all probability, Wonderwall or another song by Oasis. And they have got the brilliant ability to write songs that connect with people and connect with people over the decades. And that is not something to be in any way sneered at or dismissed. That's a great talent.
Well, John, you'd indicated that Noel and Blur's Damon Albarn have long since buried the hatchet, and they've even collaborated musically. Now, is it possibly the bigger feud was between the Gallagher brothers in Oasis, Liam and Noel, or do you think that their relationship has been truly repaired? Or perhaps the prospect of a multi-million-dollar payday simply papered over the cracks? What do you think, John?
Well, I think there's probably both factors at play, but I think the thing is, if it's your brother and you're falling out there, you're still joined together somehow, aren't you? So at some point, you're going to have to sort this situation out. I think, there's a genuine emotional thing there. You want to sort it out, don't you? So maybe that's what happened. Maybe they haven't. Maybe, there's always this mistake that bands make, especially younger bands. It's your gang against the world. But when you're an older band, maybe you don't get on. But when you're on stage, it's so magical. It sounds so brilliant. There's a certain chemistry that you could put, not getting on those people. I mean, the Rolling Stones worked out a way of operating despite 10 years and not that Jagger Rich not getting on. In the end, they have got on, haven't they? They've actually worked. It's got to the other side of that situation. So all that's in there, I think, of course, the money is a prime factor or a big factor in reforming, but there's still a thing that when you're on stage or in a rehearsal room and you're both there together, there's something truly magical happens. That chemistry that people talk about, I think it's worth putting up with all the other stuff to get to that situation.
Well, with the world we live in today, streaming has created a totally different environment for bands. And here's one for both of you, maybe starting with you, Adrian. Today on Spotify, Blur has 11 million monthly listeners, and their most popular song, Song 2, is closing in on 1 billion streams, while Oasis has more than 28 million monthly listeners, and their song Wonderwall has racked up an incredible 2 billion streams. So with both bands back on stage performing again, do you expect that new generation will discover them and they'll continue performing, even though it was the parents' music for these youngsters and they know nothing about the past feuds, perhaps?
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the great things about streaming services and video services like YouTube is that, although sadly artists perhaps don't get their fair reward from them, the upside is that young people can access music from previous generations in a way that John and I would have found really difficult when we were young music critics starting out. So my kids can, at the push of a button, listen to Oasis and listen to Blur and listen to a whole range of other bands. I was at a concert last night watching a fantastic Scottish band called Bell and Sebastian, who've been knocking around for 27 years. But my kids, who are considerably younger than me, of course, were into them. And I think this kind of division and this tribalism around music, I wouldn't say it's disappeared altogether, but I think it is a very different music culture now, where you can just say to somebody, have a listen to that. And whether it was recorded in 1960, 70, 80, 90, or last week, it's just there at the push of a button. So I think young people will continue to discover Blur. They'll continue to discover Oasis. That's brilliant.
John, Rob, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's true. I think all music is now contemporary. There's no sense of it being from what, like, I remember like the Beatles when I was growing up in punk. The Beatles seemed like they're from the Victorian times, whereas now it's all level playing field. It's all there at once. I think Oasis have resonated through the generations. I mean, even when they do the solo gigs, if you go to Liam Gallagher solo gig, most of the crowd are about 16 years old. And I think also that's partially to do with his Twitter presence, because I think in a way he's like Britain's oldest teenager. You know, he talks like a teenager, which actually is not a critique really. It's a quite cool thing to do, isn't it? He's funny and he has no filter. And then a 16, 17-year-old's complete, you know, like he's sat there answering. I mean, people put something up, he puts a funny comment underneath, you know. So I think people like that as well, they fit into the modern age. Yes, on certain levels there is a retrospective thing about them, but on another weird level, they feel very contemporary as well.
I can tell you one of the great satisfactions I have with my 18-year-old daughter is that if a song comes up on the radio and it's a remake, I can turn around and say, I heard the original when it first came out. John, Rob, Adrian Goldberg, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Cheers.
All the best.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Irene, thank you so much for joining al-Arabiya. I want to kick off by asking you to sort of walk me through how you view your role within NATO, because women today are under pressure in various parts of the world and, frankly, in the West.
So first of all, thank you for the invitation, the opportunity to have this moment of exchange about a very important topic, not only women in NATO, but I would say on women across the globe and about our rights and the general pushback, I would say, that we are facing today. The role I have at NATO, I'm the NATO Secretary General Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security, is not new. I'm the fourth Special Representative. The position was established in 2012. But after 12 years, I have to say that despite the progress that we have made within the alliance, there is still much to do. Of course, the work I do within NATO is around the mandate of the alliance. So it's specific about the role of women and peace and security. So we do not cover other issues. But of course, what we do contributes to advancing gender equality. And it is also stated in our latest strategic concept endorsed in Madrid in 2022 that advancing gender equality is a reflection of the common values of the alliance. So what I do is really to look at everything that the alliance does to make sure that gender perspectives are included. What does this mean? It means that every time we take a decision, both at political and a military level, we have to make sure that we consider the diversity of the population. Population is made by half by men and the other half by women, so we cannot take decision without considering that security is perceived in a different way by men and women.
No doubt. How concerned are you when you see President-elect Trump's pick for defense saying that women shouldn't be in combat roles?
This is a topic that has been discussed over the decades around the globe. The hope was that we had overcome the barriers, the cultural barriers. Certainly we have overcome the legal barriers. So everywhere in our across allies and also in our partners countries, women are part of the armed forces. In different extents, I would say across NATO allies, we have an average of 12%. So if we look at the population, as I said, 50% made by women, there is still a big gap to cover this percentage. I think that we still have a lot of work to overcome cultural barriers and change the mindset. We are not all at the same stage. So this conversation will certainly be put at the table, but there is a general consensus that women have to be part of the military forces. And we have proof that nowadays, if we look at Ukraine, how incredible women are fighting now on the front line. Since the full-scale invasion, a lot of women have joined voluntarily, and that's very important to say, that they were not obliged to do it. They are around 60,000 now in the armed forces. More than 40,000 are civilians, but the rest are military, and 5,000 are fighting on the front line alongside with their male colleagues.
If the United States rolls back women's role in the military, and I mean in combat positions, does that weaken the NATO alliance and the NATO mission?
I'm not expecting this change to happen. Of course, I'm expecting maybe some conversation around this, but there is a consensus. There are policies in place. This year in Washington, D.C., and our big yearly summit, we endorse a new women, peace and security policy. When we endorse a policy, 32 allies come together and they agree on what is on the policy.
Including the United States.
Including.
Yeah.
Indeed, and this lasts for 5 years. And the policy states very clearly that increasing participation of women in all peace and security efforts, both on the diplomatic and in the military side, is what we have to do if we want to enhance our operational effectiveness. Yeah. And this is where my work leads, to the implementation of this policy that will be translated next year in a new action plan. We are working on it. And this is where I will concentrate my efforts.
Yeah. Talk to me about this. You mentioned Ukraine and the role of women there in combat positions that they've taken on as an act of necessity. There's a lot of conversation, of course, about how that war may come to a conclusion. In your mind, are women better prepared to take on roles not just in the military now, but also in government in Ukraine?
I think as historically we have seen how wars change the role of women within the society. They open up different possibilities because men go to the front line. In this case, the front line is both physical and also in the space, because we see the war in Ukraine played on the hybrid space and cybersecurity, but also with very old technique on the front line. Women have filled the position in Ukraine as they did in the past during the First World War and Second World War. We see incredible women in politics at governmental level. We see women on the front line and covering all roles in the society. Even in the defense industry recently, women have stepped up and take more positions. So I think this has worked as an accelerator for the society, and I expect that women will continue to play an important role in the resolution of the conflict and in the post-conflict era, where we hope a just peace will happen soon, and we will see women to continue to take their important position.
When are we going to see a NATO Secretary General who is a woman? Because I know that was something that was mooted at the time, at the last round of conversations about this?
There was a lot of conversation about this. We need to find the best candidates. I will always say there are some requirements, and requirements are that the Secretary General has to be a former Prime Minister or a President. And this is where the conversation has to be broader.
Yes.
Because the point is, why don't we have more women in politics covering this position? Because automatically then we could have more candidates for the position of the Secretary General. So now we have just welcomed our new Secretary General, Mark Rutte, but as you might heard, this week he announced a Deputy Secretary General, who is a woman and from North Macedonia, and she will join us in supposedly a few weeks. And she's the second one in the history, so it's already a progress. And I think maybe next one could be.
Could it be Giorgia Meloni?
You're right in my mind, because the conversation we had, it's also about the South and the rotation. You know, in alliance,
Exactly.
we're trying to rotate, and sometimes, I mean, we see a tendency to have a Secretary General coming from the northern countries, and there was a conversation about the South, but the requirements didn't come together. So one option could be to change the requirements, and the other is to see more prime minister in the South. So, of course, Giorgia Meloni could be a candidate in the future.
Walk me through this. Today, the rest of this region continues to reel over what we've seen happen in Afghanistan, and I'm talking about the subjugation of women and girls. Obviously, that was an area of serious concern for NATO, and when coalition forces were there. In your mind, what is the responsibility of NATO today to those women that we promised a future and then abandoned?
That's a difficult conversation to take. You know that NATO operates under mandates, and when we operate out of our area of responsibility, we do based on resolution of the United Nations Security Council. We withdraw, the mission is over. So as an alliance, we do no longer have a responsibility there collectively because we are no longer present. But of course, allies, individually and bilaterally and in different contexts such as
and as human beings.
Yes, and they continue to provide support. The situation is very worrisome. There are no words to describe what happened. And I think that individually, as I said, a human being and with our respective roles at national level, we have to continue to speak out about what is happening there and to fight for women's rights, because the silence will really put them, you know, in a we will forgive about them, even if we don't do. But in the global conversation, you see, if you read the newspaper, it doesn't really come on the news so often.
What do you think is the solution there in your mind? Because obviously there is an ability of nations who are giving aid to Afghanistan to exert pressure on them.
If I could have a solution, you know, I would try to put this, implement it. I found that extremely difficult. What I'm doing on my side is to continue dialogue with women from Afghan and see if there is a way to support. One of the focus is always how to train women to create space for dialogue for them in terms of dialogue also with the Taliban or mediation processes. And I know that there are several women who are also present in Doha a few years ago that continue the dialogue and try also to train younger generation to make sure that they will have the possibility to play a role and to exercise their right.
When you come to a forum like this one, based in the United Emirates, a country that has promoted women not just to positions in government, also mandated their participation on boards in the private sector, are you encouraged by what you see and how the region is evolving?
Indeed, I am very much. I'm very happy to be here and to have the opportunity to engage in person, because I think this is the best way when then you have a concrete example that you can share. When people ask me, what do you do? It's difficult to explain then if you don't have stories to tell. And changing the narrative is what we absolutely have to do. So it's a very positive example, and I'm really looking forward to attending the forum tomorrow.
Tell me this, what is missing in your mind from the global dialogue for women? Because when we speak about this from a business perspective, we talk about quotas and we talk about a number of women on boards. One woman feels alone, 2 women has a friend, and then 3 women can make a change. But in your mind, from a governance perspective, from a security perspective, what needs to change?
I think it's a question of the cultural change I was mentioning earlier. And it's about gender, what we call gender-responsive leadership. We focus a lot on the participation of women, but we still find resistance, cultural barriers. And sometimes women are there because government decide to do, and then speak at global level, not referring to the local situation. But at the end, there is no real willingness to integrate. So it's more a token than a reality. So I think that what we have to look is the change of mindset of who is in power today, which in the normality are men. So we have to look into what we call the gender-responsive leadership to say that to train, to dialogue with both men and women together, to understand the benefit that the entire society will have if women take on more position at high level. It's not for women, it's not helping women to do something, when they say, I'm helping my wife. No, it's not about this. Because in the moment where the dynamic changes, men will benefit from this different dynamic. They will have more time for the children. They have more time even for discussion and conversation, not under the pressure. And the solution that will be found will be better solution because they will really bring the perspective of the entire society. So this topic of the gender-responsive leadership is something I advocated for and I put as a first goal of the new policy at NATO, because I think that in a male-dominated environment, while we work to increase the number of women, we have also to work with the men who are present to make sure that we can reach the same high-quality solution in a shorter time.
Bring them with us.
Yes.
Irene, it's great to have you here at Al-Arabiya. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
At Al-Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al-Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
At Al-Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world